Meeting to order. If I could I have approval of the minutes sent out?
I so move.
Second it.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, approved. All right, at this time, we just heard some news about Mr. Rufus's mother had passed away, and so he will be here maybe a little later, but Mr. Gonzalez, Robert Gonzalez, is going to lead us off. So at this point, you'll start, Mr. Robert. I appreciate it.
And I appreciate giving this opportunity. Like I said, I feel for Mr. Rufus right now. I just got back from vacation. It's a sad thing to come to, but we'll make it through. He's a good man. He'll be okay. What I'm going to present to you is the reports from the previous follow-ups that we did. The way we approached this last year, we went ahead and combined 4 follow-ups into one report, which is a little more efficient in some cases. And the 4 areas that we covered were program records management, the Region 1 office in Amarillo, Texas, the federal funds management process, and the payroll and personnel. And as you all have the reports, I won't go into all the details. As you can see on Appendix 1, all the corrective actions have been implemented for the program records. We did some review and some testing, and that's how we determined that we didn't have to do any more work in this area. So that has been implemented. Then in Appendix 2, we have the Region 1, which we went ahead and followed up on, and it's also been implemented. That's on page 7, Appendix. So we know there's been a lot of changes going through. As a matter of fact, as you recall, there have been some changes on the brucellosis testing, and also we did go ahead and follow up on the commission meeting minutes to ensure that was in the records and all, because of the voluntary testing that's not being done. But even though it might be voluntary and not required, it is done. We still want to make sure that the proper documentation is available for us and for anyone from the outside to come in and check. Appendix 3 is the federal funds management process. We followed up on a previous audit we had done regarding the budget, and we also followed up on an audit that had been performed by USDA and the other agencies that work with them, which is about, you'll notice, about 15 agencies. But everything proved out that according to all their findings also, the budget was in accordance with their applicable laws and federal regulations, so that was cleared up. So they have written procedures now and all. And then the follow-up audit that we did was on payroll and personnel. And on that one, we had that it was partially being implemented. And one of the things that we follow is that when someone gets hired in state government, they're required to have EEO training the first week, which is discrimination and harassment and all this. The first month, within 30 days. And then after that, once they become employees, it's every 2 years. And it just so happens that there was an individual that was in transit, I guess, from one region to the other, and also they missed the training, and they followed up and did that. But at the time we looked at it, it hadn't been done.
But it has been
Yes.
taken care of?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we do them, we try to do them within 30 days, but I think in this case, this employee couldn't do one. And we didn't have another training for a while, because that was the only person we had. So by the time they came, yeah, they were an old hand. So we recognized that, having the infiltrated focus on those.
So that's why we put there was partially implemented, because they were in the process of doing it, and it's been done since then. So those are, in summary, the 4 follow-up reports that we did. has not been implemented. Are there any questions on any of the reports?
No, but it does, I will say this, after reading through this a couple times, you were very thorough on this follow-up, and it was very good, so it looks like you
Appreciate it.
covered the.
Now, the next item that we have, and I'll go ahead and go through it with you all, is the internal audit plan for fiscal year 2014. Mr. Rufus had a big role in this, but I'm somewhat familiar with the process and why we went ahead and selected the areas that we selected. Based upon our research, review, prior audits, prior state auditor reports, and other outside entities that have looked at the agency, and of course, we also take into consideration the latest legislation, your LAR, your letter of appropriation request and all. And as to where the agency's going, we select the areas where we feel that we can be of most benefit to the agency as y'all go through transition and all this. That's one thing that we have noticed, and I'll let y'all know that this small agency has gone through a lot of dynamic changes the last few years as compared to what we're used to seeing. The other agencies have a little more stability in the sense that they're more concerned with the funding and the programs and all as to the size or of the programs, whether they're going to increase or decrease. But in this case, this agency has been going through a lot of changes. I just thought I'd mention that to you. So, and y'all are doing a good heck of a job trying to just keep the ship straight, you know, as they say. So I just thought I'd throw that little feedback from the other agencies. But as we said, the areas that we selected based upon the matrix that we have, that we use factors and all, the reason we selected Region 5 Beeville is because we haven't looked at them in a while. We haven't looked at them, I believe we did an original audit back in 2004, did a follow-up a year or two later, probably 2007, so it's been about 5-6 years now. And it's good to see what's out there now.
Is that why Dr. Lansford's leaving?
God has removed a good man on.
Do we need
T-E-R.
This
Were
is
you
Dr.
the one
Lansford.
that was?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was people, that's what we're trying. Yeah, he just moves up and takes on more opportunities to shine.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, but I knew Mr. Rufus had a reason for it. And then travel, of course, we don't, one of the things that we do when we look at travel, we don't just look at travel to see if it's being properly used or vehicles are being properly maintained. We try to find ways to see if there's any concerns that management needs to address. A lot of times, don't need to go into too much detail, but a lot of times when we go in, we also notice that capital items and outlays are sometimes we budget pretty wider. That's something that management should consider instead of just the operating budget. So if there's more demand out in the field and all, it's hard for state agencies to, of course, acquire vehicles, but it'd be a good approach. Also, in budgeting, I don't believe we looked at the budgeting area in a while also, so, but like I mentioned a while back, if there's any changes and activities as y'all have in it, it might be a good idea to get an outside, so we can use some feedback on that. So that's one of the reasons that we probably selected that. And then, of course, we do have a follow-up anytime we do a report. We're required to do a follow-up to ensure that the corrective actions and recommendations have been implemented. And of course, the one that we're looking at is emergency management process, and that was back in April of 2009. So with this being the internal audit plan, for you out there, we're asking for approval of it for this year.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the fiscal year 2014 audit plan as discussed.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. So sorry, Mr. Rufus, to hear about your mother, and so sorry, we had a pretty good report this morning, and would you like to add some things on this?
It's just as presented.
Well, again, after reading through this, if you read through this, there's a lot of reading to what y'all have done and it looks like on this risk assessment summary, there's a lot going on for 2014, so anyway, we appreciate your deal. And what was nice was to look on there and see almost all of it was implemented except for the one partial deal, and so looks like we're in pretty good shape right now.
With the USDA, correct, we'll get that fixed.
So, with that, is there anything else? Any public comment or anything? I hear a motion to.
Adjourn, I so move.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 387th meeting. Ask everybody if they'd please make sure their cell phones are off or on vibrate. And again, welcome. Do I have a motion, or do we have a discussion on the minutes of the previous meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of the 386th Commission meeting held on May 21st, 2013.
Second it.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the 386th meeting. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to item 3. Good morning, Dr. Ellis. He's going to give us his report of the Executive Director.
Is it?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Welcome. Welcome, yes, as well, and staff to the meeting. It's always a pleasure to be here. I'm trying to give you guys a brief update on the agency activities, and in your book, as always, is a summary, the bullet points, what I'm going to talk about, and we'll just go through. My intent is just to get you up to date on the basic agency activities. They're as diverse and as busy as ever, but that's what we're here for. So we're proud to represent the livestock and poultry industry and do our best to take care of y'all's business and the public's business and health as well. Start off and just a little refresher. We hadn't met since I guess about 3 or 4 months ago. So you can see here a lot of our activities over the summer have been related to legislation that was passed and the subsequent rulemaking and just changes that we need to do to take care of the responsibilities that were afforded the agency through that legislation. And you'll see later on what I've tried to do in my report throughout is anytime there's going to be a rule later, and we've got a number of rules proposed, a number of rules to pass, I'll put a little flag there, and so you can kind of see that there is a rule later on that. And as always, Gene will introduce the rules. I'm going to try and talk about them in my part of the talk as well, but we'll tag team that so we make sure you guys hadn't forgotten or understand exactly what the intent of the rule as proposed is. But as you know, we had, and again, I want to start by just saying that, the agency did very well in the last legislative session. It's a direct reflection of the support of our industry, our stakeholder organizations, and the folks that are here, and the hard work of some of you guys that went down there to the Capitol as well and made contacts. So thanks to everyone for that. And we've got fever tick legislation is very important to us. There'll be some rules in regard to that, both in regard to updating the definitions of treatment and the definition of animals, which will allow us to do some things with servage on adjacent properties. We had authority on infested but not adjacent and in high-risk areas. The poultry folks, worked with them, and the agency now has the ability to require depopulation as well as indemnification for affected flocks when we have the money, when epidemiological investigation determines it's appropriate. And most of the time, this is going to be related to backyard flocks. Commercial guys will kind of take care of themselves, and we're the caretaker of the disease investigations for the most part, and the folks that have backyard chickens. And so that's a partnership there. That legislation is very important to that industry. The Texas Authorized Veterinarian Program, very important as well, and I'll talk about this in a minute in more detail. We're the first state to do that, and basically codifies the oversight of veterinarians and their technicians, and in some cases lay folks, in the pursuit of regulatory animal health programs. And I have to say, I'm very proud of this bill for Texas to be the leader, but it's proved to be much more complex than we thought. But I think we've got it all on track, and again, we're working very closely with the veterinarians in the state of Texas. Animal ID, as y'all know, there's rules to transition away from any linkage to disease programs, and specifically brucellosis. There'll be a proposal for you, or a passage, a rule for y'all today to remove the brucellosis linkage to that, and there's also a proposal to include the new language for change of ownership testing for cattle specifically in the new ADT chapter. And then the legislation related to El Paso and a risk study for dairy. I'll talk about that as well. Finally, with the last session, you know, some of the good news was our budget was enhanced about $2 million a year. Again, thanks to the support we received. And I guess I'll just say the agency weathered the storm. We were bailing water with a bucket. I guess we can buy a pump now to bail water with. I don't know. I think it's okay. You know, one of our biggest challenges is going to be rebuilding some of the staff that we lost, and we went from 200, we got down to 122 about a month ago, and with the funding and with the changes, we can go as high as 161, more or less. I may be off a half an FTE. You never quite always get there because there's always people coming and going, but the bottom line is we're going to end up hiring about 30 to 35 people back, which is a huge. It affects our jobs and our HR department and just posting and interviewing and hiring and all those things. It's going to take a lot of work. It'll be early next year probably before we really kind of get most of those done. And you add in the fact that we had 3 retirements just in this office last week, the end of August, and some very tenured folks. Our chief financial officer, our purchasing agent, both important positions. We got good people coming up in the finance side. We're going to have to hire a purchaser because there's some specific certifications that the state requires that we didn't have in-house, even though we're working on it. So lots of changes here. Just giving you this as a background, so when you call and you wonder what's going on down there, well, we may be interviewing somebody in that little room or talking about how to word the job postings. But it's a good problem to have. I do want to make sure I introduce Dr. Lansford, UTR. I sent you guys all an email. The stakeholders got it, TR, the employees got it, the commissioners got it. Welcome to executive management. Thank goodness you're here. And so he had the similar executive experience with the Department of State Health Services and the meat side of things, and he came in on board with us and has been in a regional office, so he's got some field experience, and now he's coming back up here to be the assistant executive director over animal health programs. So that'll be the boss of the field guys for the most part and emergency management. So that's what TR will be doing. So welcome. We will have a separate budget report, obviously, but I just want to say, it's philosophically with the changes in the money. That we're gonna take a look at some processes like merit. We've had merit raises frozen for about 3 years, to be quite honest with you, and we're gonna try and take a look at relaxing some of the managerial oversight we've had. Holding those guys back where make it a little more normal in work environment, where if you have an employee that's eligible for merit and you're their boss and you want to give them the merit, we'll have some money budgeted for that, and we'll have a process where they don't have to go through hoops and ladders just to get approval to give someone a $100 raise or whatever. So we're working on some management things. We're going to take a look at the salaries for our field staff all the way across the board, and also the career ladders for those folks. But again, that takes a lot of work from our HR department. Our HR department's really 2 people, 2.5 if we count Larissa, who's still doing some of that, even though we moved her up a notch. And so it'll maybe next spring before, they're going to be hiring this fall, and then in the spring we'll start to look at some of our structured salary situations. The capital purchases, we were lucky enough to get money again for capital purchases, both computers and trucks, and it's money that's needed, and you will see one change is we're just going to ask you up front in the beginning of the fiscal year. It's not that much money, $150,000 I think each. We're just going to ask for approval to spend it sometime in the fiscal year instead of piecemeal, and every time we come to a meeting saying, well, you need $30,000 or $50,000, you're going to see a lump sum request for approval to buy trucks and computers out of that capital money. And so that's one little change that you will notice if you look at the budget side. I thought, too, I would mention, I always get up here and talk about disease things, but I thought I'd just mention to you some of the different partnerships that Animal Health Commission has with other agencies. And we do a lot of work with other state agencies, and I gave you some examples here. Texas Parks and Wildlife, obviously this fall, we're going to be working with those guys taking brain samples out of service in mule deer season and whitetail deer season in West Texas. We see part of our role there is to help train their folks. We are the veterinarians. We're going to work side by side with them. There's more of them than us, to be honest, but it's an opportunity for some of our folks to get out and do something different, and we're going to make an effort. Gene's been working with their legal staff, and I don't know when it'll be finished, but we're going to actually formalize a memorandum of agreement with Parks and Wildlife and go through a bunch of different responsibilities. We haven't updated that interagency formal agreements of how we work together. We're going to do that probably by this fall. On the DPS side, the Department of Public Safety, a couple of new things there that I'm really proud of, and one of them is that it's veterinary related in that the Capitol Complex here has a horse team, and they also have some bomb sniffing dogs here in Austin, and we've actually agreed with them. It's going to be a trade of services, more or less. We're going to become their veterinarians, consulting with them on these horses and on these bomb dogs. We're lucky enough now we have 2 vets here in the Austin staff that have extensive small animal experience. We've got vets with horse experience, and we're going to horse trade, no pun intended, of the parks, those folks, and we're not going to be doing emergency surgeries and stuff, but we're going to be doing health consultations, maybe some basic care. It's going to help them with consistency of services, save them a little money, and then they're going to help us. And for example, right now, they're already working with us on our emergency management side to get us better badges so we can have access in disasters. We're going to have real legitimate IDs rather than the ones we made back in the back, And they're also taking a look at our security system here in this office, and so we feel like that's just a good trade-off. That's good partnerships to work with the Department of Public Safety. The Department of State Health Services had a meeting just the other day. They've got rules related to tuberculosis and brucellosis testing in dairies, and I realized in discussions with them, they're struggling to enforce that actually on their side, and we've got some ability to work with them, and we also work with our dairies on collecting milk samples for brucellosis, and so we're going to strengthen that relationship. Also, they're going to be involved with us on the El Paso Dairy Bill, the risk assessment in El Paso. The vet school, A&M, the diagnostic lab, lots of partners over there. And PANTS passive surveillance, this is a process where we're working with them where veterinarians are the eyes and ears for collecting samples. And we're also at our markets looking for unusual disease conditions. And this is some USDA funded money but we actually are partners with the A&M diagnostic lab with different components of that, as well as with their Foreign Animal Disease Center over there, a number of Homeland Security opportunities at the national level. It's a research opportunity for us to partner, and Dr. Schwartz and I met with those folks a couple of weeks ago in Dallas, and Texas is going to be a key player in some of their projects. TDCJ, the prison system, we've got them on board with our horse response team now. We're going to continue to enhance that. AgriLife Extension, they're still handing out ear tags for us, and they intend to do that. So that, good partners there. The vet school, we teach at the 2nd year, 3rd year, and the 4th year level. Our staff goes over there regularly, and also their veteran emergency response team is an integral part of the Texas Emergency Management System. And TDA, lastly, Department of Agriculture, again, we just finished up a grant process where they passed through some money to both ourselves and USDA for fever tick research, and I want to make sure I thank them for their partnership, because they certainly didn't have to do that. I'll move on to the specific disease and programmatic issues now. Start with the disease traceability, your animal ID. And this is a process that's been underway, as y'all know, for really a couple of years now. Commissioners Locke and Jordan and Morales have all been involved. We had stakeholder meetings, conference calls, internal calls. And bottom line, you're going to see two rules today. One's for passage, and it's the rule just pulling it out of the brucellosis chapter. The old linkage to change of ownership and the ID rule that was originally passed last year is going to be removed from that. We have a placeholder for a new chapter on animal disease traceability, and you're going to see a proposal today. It's a very simple proposal, a lot harder to write than we thought because it's just a new concept, but you're going to see that rule, and Gene will go through the details, but basically it's putting the responsibility for the tagging of breeding cattle. I think the industry wants breeding cattle tagged on the buyer, not the seller, but it gives the buyer about 7 days to figure it out. They can either tag them, they can get them to a slaughter plant, or they can resell them through another market, and it starts over, and it's going to be a little less lenient than the federal rule. I think we can make it work, and there's still some kinks to be worked out, especially with feeder cattle at the slaughter plants. There's some things, adult feeder, not adult cattle on feed. Let me rephrase that. We don't have all that worked out yet, but I think it's a good start, and you'll see that rule up for proposal and later in the meeting. And the Market Association has been very cooperative and helping us work through, well, how to, after the cattle are bought, and they're not tagged, now what? And I think I'm comfortable that the sale barns are agreeing to help us solve that dilemma statewide. One of the things we're going to do in one of our partnerships with USDA, who's also, they're so much a partner, I just almost didn't mention them, but we're going to go around after, I wanted to make sure this rule got proposed, at least if there's any conceptual problems we can figure it out, but if not, it's time for us to go out and sit down with the sale barn owners around the state and just talk about the federal rule, the state rule. It gets confusing. We'll have a state rule proposed, and it'll be, basically we'll understand it. The federal rule's been in place, but truthfully it's just been laying there, and these rules are not the same. But Dr. Varner and I have agreed that we want a state and a federal, a USDA employee, to go together to the markets and talk, because there's two different perspectives on this. We're going to start that roadshow this fall, and we're going to, there's about 50 markets, more or less, that are federally approved, which means they routinely trade interstate. And we'll obviously be talking to all of them about the tagging facility concept, which y'all actually proposed that rule last time. It's on for passage today. And the tagging facility concept, which I think statewide the industry has agreed all markets should probably be a tagging facility, which just means they agree to use the right kind of tags and keep records and follow some general guidelines. It's really not that onerous responsibility. We'll go around and talk to all of them this fall, but we just needed to wait. I wanted to wait until we got this new rule proposed because it was kind of weird. It's a change of our concept, and so we'll see how it goes, but we're going to start that this fall, and we'll work through it. And again, thanks to the cattle industry for their help in solving the issues here. Dr. Swartz and I and Russell Easel, our new animal ID coordinator, were at a meeting in Denver last year it was an industry meeting on animal ID with USDA and other stakeholders. And there's still a lot of little small things on that federal rule that have to be worked out. You're going to see at the next commission meeting, there's going to be a number of smaller rule proposals coming in. They're just definitions and just tweaks that we have to do to our existing language to become more consistent. And so, I would just tell y'all at the national level, there's a philosophical debate about health certificates. And some states say they don't have enough veterinarians, and the federal rule allows any two states to work out movement agreements between themselves within reason. And some states are wanting to get away from health certificates and go to what's called owner-shipper statements. We used to call them waybills. I'm not a proponent of that, and I've made that pretty clear that Texas has veterinarians. Our veterinary industry is strong here, and I don't really see a reason to go backwards on this. But I'll just tell y'all at the national level, there are a number of states that would like to just quit messing with health certificates, to be quite honest with you, and just use these owner-shipper statements, which are They have information, they'll have ID on them, but it's not the same as a veterinarian looking at it. And I'm philosophically, I'm going to try and resist that change, but it is out there. And obviously, Dr. Schwartz is over our animal ID, and with the new animal ID coordinator, I've asked Andy to start giving you a little information on this from his perspective, so he'll have more on this when he gives his talk. Trichomoniasis, we had a working group meeting right before, well, it was right after, it was the same day as our last commission meeting. That's a voluntary program, industry-driven program that seems to be working well, and there's two rules up today for proposal as a result of the meeting of that working group. One of which is just a minor thing about bulls coming back into the state from test stations. The other is a little more significant in that we're actually going to propose the same kind of philosophical change of ownership with untested trick bulls that we have with untagged breeding cattle. And the rule's going to allow someone to buy a bull, and they've got 7 days to figure out whether they want to slaughter it or test it or resell it, basically. And so this is an accommodation for some of the smaller markets needed a little help. They didn't have enough slaughter buyers. It'll help the producers selling an untested bull maybe make a little more money. And at the end of the day, our agency is at the markets, and we can ensure that those bulls are handled properly. They either get tested or they go to slaughter, or they reset. So you're going to see that rule, and Commissioner Locke has been really involved with that, and I think it's something. It's a win-win. It's not going to be hard for us to help make that happen. So we're basically relaxing the trick testing requirements just a little bit.
We've been seeing a bunch of that,
Yeah.
buying them in Alice or somewhere, and bringing them by to have them tested, and then taking them home. We've got a hold order.
Yeah, they just asked, give me a chance to, if I could buy it and resell it, I'll pay more for it, and the guy will make more money, and then it helps the market, it helps the other market. And we're at all the markets, that's what we do, so we'll regulate it, and we'll work out a really kind of a little process to make sure that they don't get lost in the shuffle, but I don't think it's going to be hard for us to accommodate. And there's not that many bulls that get traded around on, but the ones that do, it's important if it's your bull and you can make an extra $100 or whatever, it's good. So we're going to do that. The other thing I need to mention to y'all is that there is a movement of the state veterinarians across, especially in the West, the East not so much, and they're the ones that probably need it, to be honest. But the Western state veterinarians are really interested in trying to get our trick entry rules consistent. Right now, it's not a federal program, and because it's not a federal program, there's no guidelines, so every state's basically done whatever they wanted to do with trick. And we, obviously, this was started the year Dr. Hillman retired, and so we started with what Idaho did. That's where he came from. And we've kind of modified that along the way. But the truth is, it's confusing to the producers across the U.S., and there are some states that I won't name that actually probably have ill-advised entry requirements. They don't make sense, but that's what they did under their best judgment at the time. And so the Western state vets are much more experienced with trick programs than the Eastern state vets, and so they've taken the leadership to try and establish some scientifically based, reasonable guidelines that everyone can adopt. And so what would that mean for Texas? It means we might come back to you guys at the next meeting, and Commissioner Locke, we maybe just want to have a conference call with our group and not call a meeting. There's two things that would force us to change if we decide to do that. We would have to go back to accepting virgin bulls for out of state. We accept virgin bulls within the state. We just don't accept them from out of state. And we would go back to accepting cultures as well as the PCR test. Some states have a strong, veterinarians. In Texas, we don't let veterinarians run cultures for regulatory work. They can run a culture for diagnostic just to see what they think, and if they find it, they have to tell us. But it's problematic in some states to regulate a private practitioner, and it's doing regulatory work in his clinic or her clinic. And in Texas, as many vets as we have, we just didn't do that. It's just the results go to the lab. They have the test there, but so for interstate entry, that would be the only other. There are other states that would need to make a 60-day test. We already have a 60-day test. We changed that a couple of years ago from 30 to 60 days. Pool samples, we changed that last year. We accept pool samples, and there's some states that don't. So just give you a heads up, you may see this on the next commission meeting, that there are, upon consultation with the cattle industry, if they agree, we may, actually, both of those things we used to accept and we just stopped for convenience and simplicity. We may discuss bringing those back just so Texas is in line with the other states to be a team player. Basically, it's it's a concept that in animal health is kind of unusual in that we're actually trying to make us sure we all are the same for this because it's a new program. We all would agree it's a very good program, but it's confusing. And we believe in the western state, in Texas, really, we're barely a western state, and we're barely a southern state. We're kind of caught in the middle there. We believe that this actually would, I think the benefit's going to come from some of the eastern states that have some rules that are really kind of weird, to be quite honest with you. And this will give them a basis to go back to their cattle industries and say, you know, the western states have been doing this for 30 years, and they're making this recommendation. I think we need to change, and I think it'll be a win-win for everybody. So be prepared for that. On the pyroplasmosis, the next disease, you know, Dr. Schwartz is going to have a lot more information on this, and Dr. Lansford and his team just finished up our second county test earlier this summer. I think we got one place left, TR, or did they test those horses?
One on the 18th.
We got one test left in Cleburne County. And so, you know, these county tests are important. I think they're necessary, and we're looking for tick-related pyro spread. This isn't related to racehorses. It's ticks. In other words, it's a climactic, geographic, unique part of South Texas that, truthfully, there's probably not more than 7 or 8 counties that could even feasibly have ticks like this. We've tested 2 of them now. We found pyro in both places, so we've got to keep going. So our EPI group, which is a strong group, very experienced folks, I've asked them to tell me where do we go next. There's 2 different philosophies there. We're going to have to start a negative perimeter. We're going to have to go to some counties and not find pyro so we can say we're stopping right here. But we also there's one county that we think has probably got a lot of pyro, but it's going to be the hardest to do, and it's not, there's some safety issues, and there's some other external factors that we may want to wait until we get our staff built back up. We're trying to hire people. So I've asked my EPI group to give me some recommendations based on prevalence, and then it's going to be a management decision. Where do we go next? Do we go to an easy county or a hard county, if that makes sense? We're going to do them both. The question is, which do we do first, based upon some internal challenges we just have as a small agency that's also doing other stuff, to be quite honest with you. So we're going to take a look at that. But be aware that we're probably going to be in the pyro business for 3 or 4 more years. And we're going to have to plod through probably at least 4 or 5 more counties, one at a time. It takes about 6 months a county. There's some great things that come out of that besides getting rid of the pyro. It's great training for our employees. They're able to deploy, and they use some of the same emergency response systems. And we get to meet the folks and down there, and it's been pretty seamless. We've not had any legal issues, but just be aware that's not going away anytime soon. We're going to continue to plot through that.
Is that gonna be Starr County?
I don't think it's no, not Starr County. It'll probably be, I don't know, it'll either be, what do you think, Jim Brooks, what? Brooks or?
Brooks is just.
Brooks is, or Willacy? You don't want to, see, Willacy's hard. It's probably Brooks to answer your question. So, anyway.
Just trying to throw it off a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to let the EPI group, it's really not a right or wrong answer, it's just how do you go first. But so from my perspective, I'm just looking at the staff. Are they tired? Are they busy? Is there other things going on? Now we have a vacancy in the Beeville region. And so when we hire that replacement, that person's going to be new, and I'm not going to throw them into a hard county test the first week on the job. So there's some things that are going. So we may do an easy one next.
That's why he's up here.
That's right. He's going to make that call. On the brucellosis front, I think we're seeing the USDA, and Dr. Varner is going to speak, and I hope he talks about this. You're seeing now the end of Texas as considered a high-risk state from the USDA philosophical perspective, especially their funding part. So October 1, there's lots of changes coming, especially affecting, our cooperatives have been reduced, and they're going to continue to be reduced. We are still getting some federal money, so I don't want to paint a picture it's zero, but it's way less than it was. But this is really impacting our lab system, and Dr. Hughes Garza may want to talk about this as well when she comes up. But things like their phones, or their federal phones, and they're now going to be state phones, so we're having to switch phones. They paid the laundry bill for the lab coats. We have equipment over there. We have people that are coming and going, and our lab system I want to commend Holly for a great management job there, and she'll talk to you. The Fort Worth lab is now closed. We're now down to one lab, but it's our capacity. We're building up the lab here while we're and actually from a managerial oversight, it's actually going to be a little easier for us because it's going to be one big lab in Austin instead of these satellite labs all over the place. But it is some logistical nightmares for a transition from federal to state funding, and also the most probably we're going to move this lab. Our lease is up January 1, and it's for sale. And I think we've made the decision to move the lab. We're going to bring it over here closer to this office. If we do that, maybe at a future commission meeting, we could take an hour or two and give you guys a tour after a meeting the next time. Not the next time, probably next year sometime, if y'all would like to see that. But the national surveillance for brucellosis, they finally finalized that plan, and after quite a bit of finagling and negotiation, what was originally going to be 8 slaughter plants in the United States that are going to continue to test for brucellosis, they expanded it, I don't know, it's 11 or 12, something like that. Now, I'm not really sure. But we got an extra slaughter plant out of the deal. So the slaughter blood in Lone Star Pack in San Angelo and then LNH will continue to be collected by USDA, and they're going to send it to our laboratory to run the test. I wanted us to have ownership of our own brucellosis tests, and the trade-off there was we're offered a cost share on the surveillance. We're paying for surveillance now, but it's important for us to do that. And we're also going to partner with USDA in a regional concept, and it's most likely that we'll begin to run some blood for other states, especially herd work. We have the expertise, and we already had a request last year to run a big herd out of Colorado for them. And so you're going to see what you're seeing as our lab will basically be the backup to the USDA lab in Kentucky. If something happens there, we'll be it really for the national brucellosis. And so we need to maintain our proficiency and our certifications and our capabilities. And so we're going to be running about 500,000 slaughter samples a year out of those 2 slaughter plants, and that's about half what we were running. We've lost Cavness and we've lost Booker or Preferred and some of the other ones. And we're going to continue to test at the state inspected plants. We're going to pay the mailing. We're going to pay for the cost of the state, not the federal government. Private veterinarians, we're going to still have a surveillance stream there through veterinarians for diagnostic work, certification work, and exports, and just voluntary testing. So there's still going to be a lot of testing. We're still going to be the biggest lab in the United States, other than the USDA national lab will be number 2. And so that's a huge change in responsibilities that we're working through under Dr. Swartz and Dr. Garza's leadership. You do have a rule later on for passage. It was proposed last time, Greater Yellowstone brucellosis concerns. And we got some substantive comments, especially from the state of Montana. It's the best comments ever, Marty. 51 pages of comments. I hope you guys read those. Dr. Zalewski did a great job with his staff of trying to codify their issues, and based upon the input, the rule up for passage today is a modification. Instead of wanting to test all the breeding cattle in those 3 states, it's just basically going to be a rule that's for you to vote on that would say just breeding cattle and from the designated surveillance area, which is a buffer zone around Yellowstone Park. Basically, it's in 3 states: Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. So much less of a geographical location that the entry rule would require cattle to be tested. Dr. Zalewski is going to talk later, and we look forward to his comments for sure. Just to remind you of the process, the USDA did an evaluation last year. It's just as the state vets, we saw what they did, we read it, we talked about it, but I asked our EPI staff to go back and closely scrutinize what's going on out there in regard to brucellosis. And our main concern is our loss of surveillance. What I just told y'all, we're not going to be testing all the slaughter blood. We're losing some of our surveillance streams just as our high-risk status is over. So our EPIC staff, and I'll be honest, the EPIC group here in Texas is the most experienced in the United States by far. We win brucellosis Jeopardy. We win it every time. You're not going to stump us. I'll just be honest with you. 25 years experience. including myself, although I removed myself from that process. I did not get involved. I let the EPI group under Dr. Schwartz's leadership, Jody Hall, Gary Walsh, Michael Greenlee, Clayton Robinson, all with 25-plus years experience in brucellosis programs. They took a look at the USDA, they took a look at the rules, and their recommendation was the rule that was proposed to you before, which is, breeding cattle from those states need to have a post-entry test or have another test before they get here. I didn't want to put any requirements on other states. We're not questioning their free status. The rule as it's set up will just basically say if they come here from the DSA, we want a second test because they could have been exposed to the disease before the incubation period's up. Animal Health Commission will go test them at no charge. We will do that at no charge. We just ask the producer to kind of keep up with it till it's time to test. And that's oversimplifying it. But that's going to be the proposal. I'll promise you that we're going to be very flexible in watching this process, and if changes need to be made, we can do that. There's different levels of risk between the three states. Dr. Zalewski can't say this, but Montana's at the better end of that risk, to be quite honest with you. I'm not going to grade the other three, but I'll just say, I acknowledge that Montana is probably been more proactive in trying to address what is truthfully maybe an unsolvable problem with the wildlife reservoir in elk and in bison, and they move, and you all know how when you get into wildlife issues, there's outsiders, other entities that can influence what would be a normal animal health decision. So they're kind of in a bind. There's no doubt about it. But we promise to watch this. Our EPI staff will watch this, and may come back to you guys in a year or two and suggest some changes. For the moment, the recommendations just keep them together. The DSA is 3 states, it's parts of 3 states, but if you look on the map, it is, it is one big contiguous concept. And so at the beginning, I'm comfortable with the rule as it's going to be proposed to you for passage. Dr. Zalewski will have some different thoughts. You can see here, I put down just for your information, and certainly not, we don't want to debate today. There's a lot of good work they're doing out there. They have mandatory vaccination. They've got surveillance in their wildlife, and most of the cattle get tested in those DSAs. So they have slaughter surveillance. They have change of ownership requirements. But the bottom line is that you have a wildlife reservoir. You have an elk population and a bison population that pose a continuous, constant threat to the breeding cattle. Even though you have firewalls in place at different levels, the cattle could move on 1 negative test. When we had quarantine herds, we had 3 tests, a year incubation to cover it. These guys can move on a negative 30-day test, and there's some. You can read my comments in there. There's just some risk factors that can't be mitigated completely. And I'll be honest with you, anytime you talk about risk, it is a perspective. It's your perspective and my perspective. Risk is different, and we just agree, to disagree, basically. But other than that, I look forward to hearing what Marty has to say when he gets up here, Dr. Zalewski. So but as I said, we're going to be flexible. We're going to take a look at this in about a year. USDA is actually going to do a risk assessment of their own, and we'll take a look at what they have to say as well, and that'll take them a while. Dr. Schwartz is actually involved with that. He's on that group that's going to evaluate the risk of brucellosis in the DSA area, and we'll go for there. So on the authorized personnel rule, as I said, I'm really proud of this rule. I want to thank TV May and the veterinarian industry in Texas for their support and their help with this. We're the first state to do this, and basically we're creating a state counterpart to accreditation. Right now, veterinarians have to be accredited through USDA to do regulatory work, and the reality is the work has become much more complex, and to a certain degree, USDA is less directly involved in regulatory medicine, and they'll tell you philosophically they don't really want to be involved as much in eradication programs. The TRIC program is a good example of where USDA is. They are not involved in the TRIC program at all, period. So they would be a little more reluctant. And then on the horse, on the equine programs, there's just some philosophical problems where USDA looks at, they're not considered livestock per se. And so it's a little harder to get action if there's a violation of a rule by a veterinarian related to equine programs, pyroplasmosis. We have rules above and beyond the federal rules. Same for EIA. Our rules are more stringent. And so this is going to give us the opportunity to expand what was originally just a brucellosis-approved personnel at the state level. That's all the Animal Health Commission did, was we worked with vets and had a little training course. It just changes the brucellosis-approved personnel concept to what we call authorized, and it's just if vets are going to work in the state of Texas in any of the programs that we oversee, they have to basically sign up. There may or may not be some requirements as far as extra training. There'll be a 1 or 2 hour course. Dr. Vickers was involved with the working group and came down. Dr. Edmiston has also been involved on conference calls. And so you've had 2 good representatives on there, and we're going to grandfather anyone that's brucellosis approved personnel. We're going to grandfather them in. They don't have to take any more training. They just have to fill out a form. And so this is mainly going to apply to new veterinarians coming into the state and graduates. But it will drive some changes in the veterinary curriculum at A&M at the vet school. And we're going to work with them to be a little more diverse about what we teach the students. And we will need to work closely with the vet community to fine-tune this. But it's going to be a good thing for everyone, I believe. We're going to have the opportunity to. It's going to give us legitimacy, to have a training and to have oversight over the health certificate process, over billing, over any interaction we have with veterinarians and their techs. And there is one part that will affect lay personnel, which is it gave us the authority to set up a certification program so cervid herd owners can take their own brains out of a deer and send it in for CWD. They actually can do it now. They can do it now. What this will do is allow us to regulate that, to say, all right, if you're going to send those samples in, you got to take our little course, and you got to follow these rules, and you got to promise you're going to tell the truth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Not that there's any problems, but it's just going to formalize. It's going to give more validity to a process, and I think that this will be a big job for us to work with the deer industry, the cervid industry, and some of those organizations were very supportive of this bill for this reason. They wanted this. I know the veterinarians are. I'm one of them. We don't want to give. We don't want to get in a situation where we're allowing things that are veterinary related to be done by lay personnel, but the collection of samples from a dead animal is not vet practice as per the board's ruling. It's not a veterinary practice, and so we're walking that fine line. I'm very sensitive to the concerns of some of our vets about are you setting a precedent here for other things? No, there's no precedent for any other thing that I'm aware of right now. This is specifically, we will set up a certification program for the collection of the brain and some lymph nodes as appropriate by herd owners and their designees that are involved in our CWD program. And I don't know, Dr. Vickers, if you want to say anything here. This is there's no one to copy. I'll be quite honest with you. We're the first one to do it. We took little pieces out of the USDA rules. We looked at the licensing board. There wasn't a whole lot there. We looked at our brucellosis approved personnel, and actually we didn't do away with that. It's just subchapter B of the rule. The first part's more generic. But the most important thing is we wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with their process. No veterinarian is going to get in any kind of trouble without a due process that includes multiple personal contacts by our veterinary staff with them. And it's not intended to be regulatory per se as much as just a loose set of guidelines to help ensure some consistency. Will someone get in trouble? Yes, they probably will. Is that the intent of why we're doing this? No, it's not. We don't have a lot of trouble with our veterinarians now, and I think, I hope that everyone understands that. I don't know if you look, I have a feeling you want to say something.
My concern is what's going on right now. Since the CWD showed up in West Texas and the mule deer, Parks and Wildlife is very, very active in going to all of these facilities and making absolutely sure that everybody is caught up. In most situations, they're finding out that they are not, because they haven't had enough mortalities to really be catching up. So they're having to sacrifice these deer. In one instance, I had 15 of them brought in. A lot of these guys are reluctant to kill these deer. They're really troubled with it. And it would be very, very easy for them to go out in the pasture and shoot some wild does, take their own brain stems, take the brain stems out of those does and twist the numbers around and be, you know,
Well, this
That-
rule
that-
does not allow that. It actually allows us to regulate that because they can do
Well, no,
that
no,
now.
that's
They can already
exactly-
do that.
that's
So this is actually
exactly
a
right.
good
But
thing.
what I'm saying is it kind of opens the door for a little bit of deceit. And that's my concern, because whenever we bring them in, when they bring them into me, we record the numbers, you know, and we've got the animals identified. They've got tattoos in their ears, stuff like that. So it kind of, I have a
understand.
concern about it.
I think we all have, I think we all have a concern with it, but, you know, and Gene may want to talk at some point, we legally can't prohibit that. The legislation that was passed that gave the authority to the agency to create rules over this did not give us the authority to prohibit it. And I mean, that's the bottom line. So we either regulate it or we just stand back and watch it happen. And so, to me, we would be better served
Well,
working with the industry to create a training system and an accountability for that when they do something wrong, if they do. And right now, there's nothing there.
Well,
I
that's the
mean,
thing, we really need to
either
address
pass
the-
it or nothing
yeah,
happens.
Stress the accountability and the downside if there's fraud involved.
Yes, and I'm sure we're gonna talk about CWD in a minute. Dr. Schwartz especially will have some things to say about the rule that's coming there, so we can continue this in a minute. But your point, I'm very aware, that's why I asked if you want to say anything, because I knew you had some concerns. Border port issues, the numbers coming in from Mexico are down. As y'all know, Mexico's basically, we knew they were gonna kind of run out of cattle at some point. They've sold us a lot of their cattle, so we're seeing a process that's still working well, possibly with the exception of Presidio, where Mexican imports are being inspected on the Texas side at temporary facilities. I'm very, very comfortable with this. I'll be honest with you, I like this. We can see that. That's visible. If any of you want to go see a port, you can drive over there. You don't need a passport or any kind of way to get there. There's the USDA with a few animal health, but it's mainly USDA folks, has got a really good system. Dr. Varner and his staff gets full credit for maintaining as best as possible trade with Mexico in a short amount of time. I don't know how long the violence will last, and then Kevin can talk about it. I don't think anybody does. But in the meantime, I can just assure you that the process down there is working well from my perspective. And we're doing our best not to interfere with trade. I mean, they've got to work, those folks that are in that business, the shrink and the weights and the gains and the loss and the rejects and all that, it's all working pretty well. And but Mexico continues to provide us opportunities for job security. We are going to hire a couple more inspectors in South Texas that will intentionally, they will be partnering with USDA. They may work 1 day a week on fever tick activities. They may work 1 or 2 days a week at those ports. And so we've actually, USDA, when we laid folks off a couple of years ago, they came in and helped us, and now they're in a budget crunch, and we're going to help them. And so you're going to see some of our Animal Health Commission field staff doing things that used to be done by USDA because it's important to the state of Texas. And so we're going to continue to partner with that, and we'll just play tit for tat. Whoever's got the resources, that's what we're going to use. And I think philosophically, again, Kevin and I agree on that completely, and he'll have a little more information. We did just catch, again, 3 more equine coming across with pyroplasmosis. The Border Patrol caught them last month. So there's continues to be a threat. We've got some herds of cattle we're going to have to catch again, at least 2 herds that we know. We're going to use our horse team to help catch them this time, and work with USDA and the landowners. And so the free movement of livestock across the border continues, and sometimes they have diseases, and it's our job to enforce and protect, along with USDA, the state of Texas.
I have
Dr.
one quick
Vickers.
comment. I was out in the Trans-Pecos. I have a client that has a ranch right there by the Black Gap along the river. This year they caught 60 Mexican origin cattle. And of course the Mexican ranch on the other side of the river, they're friends, the ranch hands talk to each other on the riverbank and everything. Those guys have disappeared. And I'm hearing from my client that most of those guys have been run off their ranches, and that's why these cattle are coming across. Nobody's out there to contain them. So we may be dealing with that issue for a long time.
Well, the herd we caught last year, that was the ranch on the Mexican side was gone. Basically, the people were gone that used to take care of the animals, and the people that lived there weren't there for the animals. So
Yeah.
that's a common theme. But anyway, I just want to just mention that to you guys. On the fever tick front, numbers are still very low. You know, we had for substantive legislation passed related to fever ticks. A lot of good things going on right now with the fever tick program, besides the fact just the numbers are down for infested premises. You will see a rule later for proposal, basically formalizing the intent of the legislation about updating the treatment from just dipping to things, ivermectin, doramectin, all the different things that we use. The vaccine is considered in there. I will say this: we're in the home stretch of the vaccine. We're starting on September 15th, the last vaccine trial in South Texas before the vaccine is approved, and it's only a safety trial. The efficacy's been worked through, ARS and the companies involved, along with USDA, all the agencies. We know the vaccine works really, really well, and so basically the last trial is they're going to give the vaccine to some cattle, then we have to make sure their neck doesn't swell up, they don't get a knot, they don't fall over dead. And this will go on through December. We've been assured fast track through the Center for Veterinary Biologics out of USDA. We've been assured by all entities that they're going to very quickly finish the approval process, assuming the safety trial works. We don't want the vaccine to be linked to any kind of oversight of cattle going to slaughter. We want a full approval with a withdrawal time. I guess it would be 60 days, Kevin, is that right? Is that what 60-day withdrawal time, at least initially? And so my goal right now is I think by February 1st we'll have vaccine available, and we'll start to work with the industry at the state level and with the industry and the ranchers in South Texas to begin next year putting this free vaccine in their cattle, and as well as RFID tags. Mandatory RFID tags. We want them all where we can, and that'll be free as well. So that's good news. And again, I want to thank the Texas Department of Agriculture for their help in funding the research projects in the home stretch here, guys. Swine health, as y'all know, there's a new swine disease, and Commissioner Real's not here. But we have a national epidemic of disease called porcine epidemic diarrhea, and it's very fatal to baby pigs, grower pigs, little pigs, and it's changing the management system in the United States, really, these commercial outfits. It's a very interesting disease model to take a look at to see how quickly this new disease spread through a number, maybe up to 20 states now have this. It's affected their management, and one of the ways that we've become involved is there's now a company, one of the larger companies is actually, they've changed the way they market their slaughter hogs, and they're actually, there's a facility in the Panhandle of Texas that we are working with them to get going. It'll become a tagging facility because we're going to have hogs moving across state line from other states to a Texas facility, and they're going to sort and then resort and then redistribute these hogs to the slaughter plants, the cull sows mainly. In an attempt for biosecure reasons to not they're trying to keep this disease from spreading within their sow houses, and so they've gone to an off-site location for the management of their slaughter sow process, and it's in Texas in the Panhandle. And we actually signed them up as a tagging facility, and we're using back tags as official ID on these hogs, and the hogs are for the most part not from Texas. But our local guys up there, we're working with them, working with the companies, on management. We do have a PED case in Texas. It's not the same company, but we have we're working with them on biosecurity, on just security in general, on emergency management. If we hit a blizzard and they get really cold or there's some kind of disease, do we have a plan in place to manage a large number of large sows? And so we're working. I'm very proud that we're part of that, and we're partnering with the swine industry in that regard. There's also, just be aware, there's ongoing movement within USDA to try and strategize future plans for feral swine eradication, or at least control. I sent in comments earlier this year with some concerns I had about the minimal inclusion of both veterinary services and animal health authorities in this. The plan, for the most part, it delegates as proposed to Wildlife Services, the control of feral swine, and Wildlife Services as a USDA agency. We work quite closely with, actually, a lot. I didn't mention our partnerships, but I could go on and tell you some things we're doing with those guys. Good guys from my perspective here in Texas, but they're not going to eradicate feral swine, and so my position is that we need to don't forget the animal health folks, because we're the entity, when the disease does get spread, we're going to clean it up. We're going to work with the industry to clean it up, whether it's pseudorabies or brucellosis or whatever it may be. And so we put in those comments to don't forget the state animal health agencies. Tuberculosis continues to be, this is probably we spend more time on this. I mean, that's the 19th thing I've talked to y'all about. This is probably our biggest, we spend more time on TV right now than anything. I've shared with you guys our EPI reports, our monthly EPI reports, and if y'all want to see those, I'll continue to send them to you. It gives you a pretty quick oversight of how complex and diverse our traceability is, especially related to tuberculosis exposed animals, both U.S. origin and Mexican origin, and it's not going away. I mean, we're going to continue to always be vigilant for tuberculosis. Because we're a big state, we've got lots of animals, we're close to Mexico, but we also have slaughter plants, and we kill a lot of cattle from all over the United States that might have TB. And it's our burden to figure out that they're not from Texas, and then where they come from. And then if they are from Texas, it's our burden. And we've got a number of active traces right now. We're still actively tracing a number of slaughter cases within the state, and it's keeping our field staff extremely busy. So you do have a rule later related to new blood tests for deer TB, and that was proposed, and it's up for passage today. And we're excited about that test, and I hope to get that test in our state lab here soon. We run the cattle TB blood test. This is a deer blood test, and USDA is in the final stages of validating it. They're still kind of looking at it. It's approved, but they're still playing around with it, if I can use an unprofessional term, to try and make it better. And when they get the protocol finalized, we want this. We're going to run this test in our lab here in Austin. So, chronic wasting disease. I'm not going to say a whole lot because Dr. Schwartz is going to talk in a minute. Other than to say, thank you, Commissioner Winters, for yeoman's duty working through a really difficult task. And the rules that the commission are proposing are reaction to federal mandates, more or less. Whether we like it or not, that's kind of what we have to do if we want our program validated. And I'll just leave it at that. And I know there's a lot of people that wish we didn't have to make some of these changes, and it's certainly only because we have to, from my perspective. And I'll let Andy talk more, and Commissioner, you can say whatever you want at any time. I'm through, other than I'll tell you I had 2 waivers. One was allow a trick bull to come in untested that was evacuating a pasture in Colorado. I don't know if it was on fire or they just ran out of water. They needed to move it, and we let them test it upon arrival in Texas. Actually, the owner had a place in Texas. And the other was an entire herd in New Mexico that was it wasn't under investigation. They took the herd for humane reasons, and they took them to a feedlot in the Panhandle for care and management. And so we waived basically every entry rule until they got there, and then whether it's a trick test or an official ID or whatever, we worked through it with them. But they needed to get them out of that. They were actually confiscated from the place in New Mexico, and it worked out. It's all fine now. Those are the only 2 rules. One other change I made to my presentation is that Bonnie is going to give her own public information report from now on. She's graduated. She's moved up. Where are you, Bonnie?
In the back corner.
Yeah, so don't heckle her too hard. She might be a little nervous, but I said, I'm not going to give you a report anymore. You just come on up here. You can see there's a number of rules that we're going to have. I think you're going to see truthfully from now on, there's always going to be a number of rules for proposal. We've got 2 pages of ideas, so I'll just promise that I will work with each of the commissioners for your commodities, and we'll talk about them. And the challenges don't overwhelm our legal staff, because writing these rules is hard. I'll just be quite honest with you. I do want to make you this promise, though, that we're going to do a better job as an agency of getting you, when you get your book in the mail, if you want it in the mail, if you want it electronically, we can talk about that. We're still wordsmithing rules. I mean, you write it, it's like writing a book report. You write and come back the next day and go, oh man, I need to change that paragraph. So we have those same challenges, but I'm going to try. Gene and I have talked about hitting some deadlines where the book that you get is a little closer to the final product, and I just want to tell you we're aware of some problems there. But also, if you guys want these electronically instead of in paper, or you don't want them until you get here, we can talk about that, because you know, we're killing a tree or two every time we send you these rules. And so if you don't want us to do that, I can send them by email, just attach it just as easy. So I'll stop there and I'll be glad to answer any questions. That's my report. And as always, it's an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the action of the executive director for the period from May 22nd, 2013 through September the 10th, 2013.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the executive director. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. As chairman, I'd like to publicly thank Dee. I'm so glad that we've gotten some more funds from the legislature. We've all worked very hard. Every commissioner has worked hard, and I know he's going to make the right decisions. And I think it's a reflection on how the our industry partners feel the importance of this agency is, and a lot of it has to do with you, Dr. Ellis, and we appreciate all your hard work. Bonnie, I have 1 hour set aside for you.
That's music to my ears.
Okay. No.
He warned me. He said, I'm going to have a little clock timer over here going 1 minute. Well, good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. Today, I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly share with you some of the agency's communication outreach initiatives. First, I'd like to talk about exhibits. As part of our communication plan, we participate in several industry-related exhibits throughout the year and statewide. Recently, we've had a presence in some of the following. In June, we were in the Independent Cattlemen's Association Convention in Bastrop. Then in July, we were in San Angelo at the Pork Producers Conference. Then in August, we took a trip to Aggieland and we were at the Beef Cattle Short Course. Later this month, we'll be attending the Southwest Vet Symposium in San Antonio, and Region 5 will be manning that exhibit. Secondly, I want to touch just a little bit on brochures. We all know that having informational material readily available and accessible to the public, the citizens of Texas that we serve, is a critical component within our communications plan. So with that said, we have an array of disease-related and program-specific brochures that are available on our website. I'm also pleased to announce that we have several of those brochures available in Spanish. And again, all those brochures can be found on our website, ready to be printed and shared via a link on email. And having them in Spanish is just an extra customer service that we're trying to provide, and we're pleased to offer having those available in Spanish as well. Moving on to newsletter initiatives, we feel it's very important to keep the family spirit alive and well within the agency, so we compile a quarterly agency newsletter that includes personal and professional accolades and agency happenings. So we enjoy sharing it with you. We hope you enjoy it as much as we do. If for some reason you guys are not receiving it, please let me know so we can get that fixed, because we do include you all in our mass email list of when that goes out to the agency. If you have any questions or ideas, please let Lisa or myself know. We're always open to and looking for new creative ideas to spruce up our newsletter and rejuvenate it. Next, let's go ahead and move on and discuss the Farm Bureau News and Views and how it relates to the agency. Many of you are ranchers and farmers and producers yourselves, so you may already have heard of it. Just in case you haven't, what Farm Bureau News and Views is a segment hosted by Tom Nicoletti. It's a 5-minute program that takes an in-depth look at agricultural issues here in Texas. And in an effort to stay top of mind and reach out to Texans, we raise awareness and educate ranchers by partnering with Farm Bureau to do a monthly interview. Different THC subject matter experts alternate in participating in doing these monthly interviews. Topics can vary anywhere from current issues to simply just educating the industry about diseases we regulate and or specific programs that we have. Just to touch on a few, I'll give you a few examples of recent interviews we've done. In August, Dr. Pete Fincher, Region 6 Director, raised awareness about anthrax, since it's relatively that time of year. The month before, Dr. Tier Lansford, the new AED, but previously Region 5 Director, interviewed about wrapping up the Claiborne County pyroplasmosis testing. If you're interested in finding out if there is a radio station near you that carries a News and Views program, I've included in y'all's commission book a radio station affiliate sheet. And if you have any questions, usually it's carried Mondays through Fridays. If you have any questions about that, I'd be happy to talk to y'all offline about those monthly interviews. Next, we have a new feature called Request a Speaker. Let's talk about what that is. This day and age, everyone has crazy busy schedules. So anytime we can cut corners and save time, it's greatly appreciated. With that said, in an effort to help the citizens of Texas, we now offer a resource that's fast, efficient, and an easy way to reach out to us, the Texas Animal Health Commission, and ask someone to come out to speak at one of their functions, whether it be 4-H, FFA meeting, ICA, TSURA, TCFA, Pork Producers, Poultry Federation, any of those meetings, conferences, conventions. Now, it's as simple as 1, 2, 3. You can go to the website. There's a little button called Request a Speaker. You just do the who, what, when, where, and why. Comes electronically to me. I receive the request, coordinate the details from there, and it's as simple as that. And we hope Texans also appreciate this new time-saving service that we're providing to them. In wrapping up, I'd like to just end with discussing social media. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Flickr, Instagram, etc., etc. You're shaking your head. But that's what the buzz is all about these days. And I know some people don't like it, or it's a craze, but it's not going anywhere. It's here to stay. It's not a fad. So as part of the agency's overall communication plan, we're embracing this free communication resource by engaging and interacting with our audience and providing informational and educational material. Lisa and I do our best to promote the agency and showcase who we are and what we do. We strive to stay abreast of current communication trends, and Social Way is a great way to tap into a new audience and demographics that very well may not know about us, but should. So I invite you to keep up with these channels, even if you don't have a Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or LinkedIn. I'm looking around the room, and I know some of you all do. But if you don't, that doesn't mean that you can't be in the know. You can still be in the loop, and offline, I can certainly show you how to do that. Examples of some of the interaction we have on social media you can find in y'all's commission book. And just briefly, some of the things you may find. Looking at Commissioner Winters, you'll see pictures of Commissioner Winters or posts about Commissioner Winters, Commissioner Wheelis that were recently at our inspector workshops, which we appreciate that. You'll see posts about industry partners such as Josh Weingartner of Texas Cattle Feeders Association, Jason Skaggs of TCRA presenting to agency staff workshops. You'll see our horseback emergency response team video on there as well. And just all in all, pictures, information about our staff hard at work and carrying out our mission on a day-to-day basis. And that's just to name a few. At this time, I'm happy to entertain any questions that you all may have, if you have any.
I wasn't shaking my head because I don't like it.
Okay.
We better figure out how to work this if we want to get a better president, because that's how you elect presidents now.
Through social media.
Yes. I didn't mean to say, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
That's great.
Well, if there are not any questions, that concludes my report, and I thank you guys for listening to me and for the service, as always, that you provide to us.
Great work, great work. Thank you so much.
Commissioners.
I lost my place. Thank you again, Bonnie. Dr. Schwartz, give his report.
Get your Facebook up.
No, I'm not. I don't know how.
Just on Twitter, and
I'm trying to figure out how I can absorb and incorporate some of Bonnie's enthusiasm into my report. I don't know if I can't equal her, so just bear with me. So, as usual, I'm starting out with the cattle diseases today. Tuberculosis, new cases. I counted back to October of last year, which is the federal fiscal year, and we've had 12 cases of tuberculosis. All of them were in steers, all of them found through slaughter inspection. And working up those cases, doing the investigation, 9 of them were still wearing the Mexico origin tags that they had when they crossed the border. So 9 of the 12 we know for certain were from Mexico origin. 2 more were in lots of Mexico origin cattle, so they're inbranded cattle with those lots. So we feel certain those trace back to Mexico as well. And the remaining case, the 12th case, we're still working on right now. That was a steer as well, but it was just killed under the name Blake. There was just a name as a consigner, no tag recorded at all. So we're having to do a lot of work with that one. it's the individual who presented that one for slaughter buys a lot of knockouts from feed yards and all, so it's kind of a complicated trace. But my point is that 12 new cases we've worked on this year, and all but one of them have been confirmed as being Mexico origin. Our concern is that as those animals are grazed, out near some breeding cattle and all, that they might spread tuberculosis into those neighboring cattle. So we follow up, we make a map, identify the neighboring herds, and test them where we know that there's breeding cattle that might be exposed. We think that's what happened with the beef herd in Coke County that near San Angelo that I've been talking to you about since April of last year. That herd was discovered through slaughter inspection as well. It was depopulated to slaughter with federal indemnity. We did tested neighbors, we tested wildlife, and the best we've been able to determine, it was likely a neighbor that had grazed some mixed origin cattle that is a source of TB, although we couldn't confirm that. As you can see in my report, we've traced a large number of animals out of that herd, 936 head to be exact. Some of them are cows and bulls, of course, but a lot of them are heifers and steers without any identification. So we think everything wearing an official ID has been successfully traced, at least through the first layer. One cow left the herd and went through 2 herds in Texas and ended up being in North Dakota. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis in North Dakota. So there's a large ranch there that's having to undergo testing, multiple units. I think it's quite an ordeal there. But and the cow tested negative on the caudal fold test twice along the way. So that just tells you, our tests aren't perfect. We've got to be really cautious. It really is something, it's kind of I'm not going to say encouraging, but at least, we do a lot of tracing, a lot of work, bother a lot of people to track these animals, and every now and then you find one that you really needed to find, like this cow. So we were, I guess, pleased in a different sort of way there. But just to wrap up some traces that I talked to you about before from a TB-affected dairy in California, we had 2 lots of heifers, 118 head in one and 86 in the other, that were received from that dairy as baby calves. They spent time here in Texas and are grown up and are about 2 years of age now. But, so they've been away from that affected herd for 2 years. So we tested those with the skin test and the blood and 2 different blood tests in parallel, tested them twice, and took out all the responders, didn't find any tuberculosis, so we felt confident in releasing those cattle. So they're now free to move about the country. So, brucellosis, you heard Dr. Ellis say earlier that the picture's changing in Texas. We're getting ready to switch from seeing negative test results on all slaughter cattle to just the 2 plants and state inspected plants. So that'll be a significant drop in the volume of testing that we see, and I'll let Dr. Hughes Garza share those numbers with you here later. Trichomoniasis, so far this year, this calendar year, there have been about 15,000 bulls tested. 336 of those were positive, gives us about a 2.2% test positive rate. When I reported to you last in May, it was about 2.9%, but the number of bulls being tested right now is down. It's just summertime heat. I guess when the fall working happens again, I think we'll see those numbers jump back up, and it'll be at least the number of bulls tested. Hopefully the percentage of positives will not, but we'll see what happens. With in the swine disease front, Dr. Ellis talked to you earlier about porcine epidemic diarrhea virus. There are 17 states where that disease has been confirmed, and Texas is on that list. We're playing an education and awareness role, so this is a disease that is causing significant losses in the swine industry, but it's not one that we regulate. So our role again is education and awareness. There is a study that's being undertaken by USDA, Centers for Epidemiology and Animal Health, together with University of Minnesota, and they're looking at this outbreak to study how the disease spread, what are the risk factors, and what are the biosecurity practices that are working. So Dr. Ellis has given the go-ahead for that study to be conducted with Texas producers, if the producers are agreed to willing to share their information. And we talked to you about that swine facility in Follett already, and we felt comfortable that that that's not going to present a disease situation because it's far enough away from other commercial swine operations. There are out-of-state animals being brought in without identification on them necessarily, but they're tagged and records are kept back to the farm of origin there and to the slaughter plant, the final destination. So we think that's a safe operation there. They're running about 2,500 head per week, and we'll continue to monitor that. Going to equine diseases, equine piroplasmosis, we are in the very final stages of the Clayburgh County high-risk test. That's the second county that we've done, and we've got Dr. Lansford, the expert in the room here. He should be doing this report, but it's a lot of hard work by our personnel who deployed there and spent many hours chasing those, especially the donkeys. They turned out to be harder than the horses, but as you see, there were 872 equine tested on 326 premises. There were 19 positive animals found, and that sounds really bad, and it is not good news for us, but 14 of those 19 were in one pasture. Every horse in that pasture had pyro, so that tells us, we got some tick transmission going on there with the cayenne tick. And as Dr. Ellis said, we've been charged with deciding. I think we're just going to have to point to a county and go. But I think we got some more pyro to find down there, and especially along the where there's a little more rain along the coast, where the cayenne tick likes to live. As far north as San Antonio, so hopefully it's not that far up, but it could be. Switching to equine infectious anemia, we had a little bit of a concern earlier this year. There was a recall of an ELISA kit and an AGID kit, so that they were giving us the concern was false negative results, and so we reran all the high-risk samples that we had, those that were taken on horses near the border or in investigation. We reran those with another kit, didn't find anything else positive, so that was good. And TVMDL did a similar thing. They assessed all the samples they had run, and they came up negative. For animal disease investigations, there were 3 horses on one premises with oral lesions, and we tested those, investigated those, and they were negative for vesicular stomatitis, so that was good news. On the poultry front, we had 1 FAD investigation and with death losses in a backyard flock, and it turned out to be negative for any serious disease there, so that was good news as well. With the cervids and exotics, it was chronic wasting disease. As you recall, in June of this year, we gained a temporary provisional approval under USDA's recognition for our deer producers to move animals interstate. So we got the provisional approval, and today there's a portion of that Rule 40.2 that's the final touch. I mean, that's the last thing we need to do for USDA to recognize us as fully approved, and that just would. The critical part of that is just that CWD suspects of any age be tested, not just down to 12 months. So that's the critical thing. There's also some other changes in there that make it a little bit easier to do the inventory and all that. So we sort of backed off of what was on the standards and went back to what the federal rules said and held the line there. So that's what you see in those adoptions today. I just wanted to mention that we're working with Texas Parks and Wildlife. There's an effort to restock pronghorn out in West Texas, and previously I think they'd gotten some pronghorn from the Panhandle, but now there's a little bit of rain there, and the guys in the Panhandle want to keep their pronghorn, so they want to move some from out of state, and to move them by our entry requirements would take a brucellosis test and a TB test, which would mean injecting them and reading them 3 days later, which is a problem with an animal like a pronghorn that doesn't lend itself well to capture. So we've done some consulting with some of our other state partners, and it looks like we may be able to let those pronghorn move without TB or brucellosis testing them. So we're encouraged by that. So the final part of my report, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, is the animal disease traceability activities. And at the future commission meetings, I'll just have a few updates for you. I wanted to tell you about their official ear tag distribution and tag allocation. That's the bright metal ear tags, those silver brights as they're called, that we're distributing to producers to put in themselves to meet the identification requirements at change of ownership. And to date, we've shipped out 426,000 of the tags, and that's we pay the shipping, but the tags are provided by USDA. There are 204 AgriLife offices, county offices, that are tag distribution partners, and so they give out boxes of tags and some pairs of pliers to producers that want them, and then they record which tags were given to which producers, and we put it in the database, so if we need to track those tags in the future, we can do it. And the tag is tied to the owner's name and phone number and mailing address, but not to a premises, not to a location necessarily. On the traceability regulations, the approved tagging facility rule, you'll see that, well, that's up for adoption today. Cattle identification rule is up is being proposed today. Some meetings that we've attended, the national level meetings, Dr. Ellis mentioned the Joint Strategy Forum on Traceability in Denver last month, and it was a well-attended meeting. I think a lot of state and federal people there, but some industry there as well, and we talked about some issues about traceability. Where can we accept an ownership or statement, and where should we hold the line with the CBI, and also we're working through some of those issues. This coming week, Russell Eselt, our ADT coordinator, will be going to St. Louis for an animal identification coordinator workshop there, and they're going to continue work on some of these issues about how the traceability rule might be implemented in our states. And the last thing I'd mention is that we're working on several fronts with electronic data sharing, and you know, it goes along with that whole Facebook and Twitter thing. But if we can get, you know, those hundreds of thousands of paper documents that come into the office on animals being moved into the state and out of the state, we're working toward getting those in an electronic format so that we can meet that traceability requirement, so that the IDs go into our database and we can track them if we have to, or we know which owner got those animals. So we're working hard on that to develop our own electronic CVI, but we're encouraging private enterprise to provide those as well. So there are already 2 companies that we're working with that will provide the electronic CVI, charge the $7 fee that we're required to collect, and then pay us the money. We just developed that agreement with the second company. We're working on it this week, and there's also an option of a free federal CVI, but then we have to go after the fact and try to collect the money, so it makes it difficult. So anyway, so that we're working on that and some other things like an electronic 1011, you know, the Coggins test form, and a standardized form there. So we're working on ways that we can share the data, do the traceability we need, and not get in the way of commerce and industry. So with that, I would complete my report.
Mr.
Sure,
Chairman,
Commissioner Winter.
I'd like to take this opportunity to put this on the record. This chronic wasting disease issue has been, for the cervid industry, a large problem for many years. The federal regulations were developed in such a manner as to impede the commerce in the state of Texas of our cervid industry. It was and still is quite a problem. Chairman Morales, I want to thank you for granting Dr. Ellis, Dr. Schwartz, and me the latitude to think out of the box to try and deal with this. Dr. Ellis, thank you for your time and leadership and willingness to work with industry. Dr. Schwartz, thank you very much for your expertise and the countless hours that you put into this, as well as Mr. Snelson in our attempt to develop a system that is workable for the state of Texas without flying totally in the face of the federal government. This is not a real good program we've got right now, but it beats the devil out of anything else that anybody else has. And I thank you very much. This has been several years reaching this point. You had a lot of other issues that certainly could have occupied your time and your conscious mind, but you made this attempt to help the cervid industry, and I thank each one of you very much. I certainly do appreciate it, and I hope the industry does too. Thank you.
I just want to keep hunting mule deer in West Texas, so do what you got to
Yes, me too.
do. Thank you. It's always great to have our federal partnership with Dr. Varner, Veterinary Services, and we look forward to hearing what you have to discuss with us this morning. Dr. Varner?
Thank you, Chairman and Commissioners. Good morning. I gave everybody a handout this morning to kind of, if you want to follow along with this, and really I'm just going to really talk about two topics. One is ports. The second is just a brief word about our TIC program, and then I'll mention something that Dee had mentioned earlier on funding of the laboratories. So the first handout is really a snapshot in August of all of the ports in the southern United States. So it's 10 ports. 5 of those are in Texas, and 5 are spread out across New Mexico and Arizona. And you can see, I'll point out 2 things that are of interest here. One is Laredo, Texas, was our #1 port in August. And that's really a reflection of that kind of battle between Tamaulipas, Cattle Union, and Nuevo Leon. You know, they're out there searching to try to, one-up each other on the number of cattle through that port. The second thing is Presidio. Presidio is at 493 animals in the month of August, okay? In a month, 493 animals. That port we crossed 260,000 head there last year, okay? 493 head. So this is an issue that we're going to work with and that I'll talk about. The next page is I'll draw your attention to the middle columns. If we look at FY12 versus FY13, you can see that we're down 55% in Texas. Those numbers are for Texas. That's 758,000 head, 758,000 plus last year at this time. We're at 342,000 this year. So we're down 55%. Now, if we drill in those numbers and we look at our ports from FAR to Presidio, we get a little bit different picture. If we look at FAR, we're down 29%. Okay, so overall we're at 55, but at FAR we're only down 29. In Laredo we're down 17%. And that's that battle. We want to increase the number of cattle moving through there. So we're down 29% at FAR, 17% at Laredo. But as we move farther out west, we see that Eagle Pass is down 66%. Del Rio's down 71%. Presidio's down 75%. There are 2 things happening, and I mentioned this last time. I think we all know it. One, there's fewer cattle in Mexico. We know that. Okay, there's fewer cattle in Mexico, but there's also a shift to the west, and that's really affecting all 3 of our ports: Eagle Pass, Del Rio, and Presidio, but especially Presidio. And that shift of the cattle that remain in Mexico, there's a higher percentage going through Santa Teresa, and that's in part, one, they're a heck of a competitor. Okay. They market their services very well. They've got a good facility, and they don't have the Rio Grande River to contend with, and so those cattle walk across the border, and they sell that piece. They say, we're not going to have the shrinkage, et cetera, et cetera. Now, most of those cattle, or a large share of those cattle that move through Santa Teresa, come up back into Texas. We know that, but we're still concerned because USDA, I think, as producers, we want as much balance on that border as we can get. We want to maintain those 5 border ports in Texas.
So could I ask a question while you're on that subject?
You bet.
Have y'all studied the fact that the movement west to Santa Teresa, does that have any correlation with our movement in the southern and central part of the border in Texas, moving those check stations on the U.S. side? Has that created, in your opinion, more of a motivation for the Mexican exporters to go further west to cross because they don't have to deal with that? And I think one of the things that could be looked into to find that out would be the states of origin on those exports in Santa Teresa. Have y'all noticed a higher percentage of Tamaulipas, Nuevo Leon cattle going all the way to Santa Teresa?
Okay, so what we see, first, what's interesting is if we look at, you look at FAR and you look at Laredo, that hasn't shifted. We haven't seen as much shift. I think that's really just a matter of there are fewer cattle in Mexico, right? And those guys are going to funnel into South Texas, or they or they don't want to run Highway 2 on the Mexican
No.
side, right? They get too far and they say, that's where we're crossing, I don't care about anything about anybody else. We get farther out west, I think the calculation changes, and I think, why don't I maybe talk about Presidio particularly, because I think in part Presidio is we've got some real issues when we moved across the border that we didn't realize, okay? We've decided, USDA, that we're not going to work in Mexico in most cases, unless, in very specific situations. We are servicing that facility in Nuevo Leon. But everywhere else, we're not going to drive through cities, basically. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line today. Maybe in a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years. But we're not driving through Reynosa anytime soon, or Nuevo Laredo, right? Maybe Oinaga, but at this point still, we're saying we're not going to drive through city streets. So we bring it across in Presidio. We built a nice facility. It's right there at the border. We size it to run 2,000 head a day, and we can do that. But we run into some problems. One that we didn't anticipate, frankly. They're on a different time zone in Oinaga than Presidio. So our 9:30 is their 8:30. So they get up and they start working, and that means the cattle, they're already an hour behind us. In order for these facilities to work smoothly and keep cattle flowing, you need cattle there as early as you can. At Laredo, we'll get cattle there at 9:30. At Presidio, we can't make it much before noon. So we're starting our workday at noon there. And so what happens is, the guys out at Santa Teresa say, well, wait a minute, you're not getting your cattle across till noon, you're going to get shrinkage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We can get you slipped right through here. And they've built apparently a new access road over to the Santa Teresa pens, and so they play up every aspect of their situation. And the guys in Presidio, both on the Mexican side and the U.S. side, they took over the last year, they've taken kind of the view that, well, if we make this work, these guys will never go back to Oinaga. So we're not going to work really hard to make it work, because the way we get back to Oinaga is to say it doesn't work. So what we did is we met with the folks out there about a month ago. Texas cattle feeders were there. Producers, politicians, Sagarpa was there, Customs and Border Protection, and we talked basically about what we could do. I laid on the line, guys, we can sit here and if you don't want to make it work, well, it won't work. They're committed now. The USDA has not wavered. We're not going to go back to Oinaga, for this foreseeable future, okay? So that's just, you talk to the politicians, do whatever you want to do, we're not going back. So once we got beyond that, I said, well, let's look at what we can do. So we're going to take measures, and we put together a plan that we're actually getting it through the draft through Riverdale, through downtown actually, to get those cattle there earlier. Our goal is to get cattle there early, get them through that facility, and encourage the use of that facility. So we're talking about one of the things that they do out at Santa Teresa is they start early in the morning. Well, we have that hour difference, which is the problem, but we're going to work and meet and work with the Union people to start earlier out there. We're going to work on, there's some issues on trucking out of Presidio. Not enough trucks. We're going to talk to them about trucks. Sagarpa's a problem. And I don't want to keep blaming it on that side of the border, but Sagarpa, with cattle are ready to go, and Sagarpa sometimes is not there. We've got delays at the bridge. They're physically actually adding some lanes out there, but that's going to take time. But we're working with CBP, and they're committed that when and where they can, they're going to prioritize those cattle trucks across, because nobody wants cattle sitting on that bridge in the heat of the day. And the last thing we're doing is, I want to try to encourage these guys to bring cattle in the afternoon for us to scratch and inspect and dip first thing next morning. And so what we're proposing is, on a temporary basis, to start to basically provide the feed for free. We've got an overhead bin there. We've got feeders that we roll in. We've got a feed that we've used at Eagle Pass and fed thousands of animals. And we're going to try to encourage guys so that, I mean, you know how that facility works the best. If your folks get there at 8 o'clock in the morning, you've got 400 head ready to go. You process those, and you've got new animals coming in, and we're, we're at that, we're approaching that 2,000 head a day. And that's what, if we looked at last year when we were really running strong, for like the first 6 or 7 months of FY12, we were averaging 1,742 animals a day at that facility, in Oinaga. Every day they were open. So that's what we sized our side for, but it hasn't worked out. The reality too is that if you look at those numbers, even in good years, it really dries up out there for a month or two in the middle of summer. So we don't want to overreact, but we want to also make sure that we are trying to address that. So let's any other questions on that? I mean, Presidio is an issue for us, guys. And we don't want to see this shift be a permanent thing. We want as much balance as we can get along that border. We want guys to make decisions. So we want all 5 of our ports to be viable.
You don't oversee the Santa Teresa port.
No, but that in that reorganization, Jim Amon is going to be responsible for all 10 ports. One person. So we're going to try to get, because underlying everything there, people say, well, they don't inspect him as tough over there, and there's all that. We're going to try to get consistency from port to port and fairness from port to port, from far all the way out to.
So that'll change.
Yeah, that'll change. Now, there's some politics with change, right? If we start to slow Santa Teresa down and say we got to change inspection, and we'll hear about that. So.
I've got some ranches I consult with over there, and the normal protocol, their weight on the ranch, they're bought on the ranch. There's been a trucking issue going through Eagle Pass, and part of it is some of these truckers have been intimidated, and had to pay a mordida and stuff like that by the gangsters. So, they're all going to Amarillo up in the Panhandle to be fed, or most of them are, and so that's why they're going through Santa Teresa.
Okay.
It's an easier route, and there's more access to trucking, is what I'm told.
And again, guys, I talked a few months ago to some brokers, and they said, listen, they're a really good competitor out there. Santa Teresa they're playing up their services, and so let's switch to ticks then.
Yeah.
And just a couple words about ticks. I've got this first thing. Dee mentioned numbers, and you see, the numbers look good, right? If you look in this section of this first page, we can see that in 2010, in July of 10, we were at 110 pastures. In 11, we were at 117. In 12, we were at 66. This year, we're at 32. The numbers look good. The trend is right. We're also, the story behind those numbers is those herds, those pastures are all pressed up against the border, okay? If we've got a few, we've got 8 in the free zone, but when they're in the free zone, they're basically right across the road, right across the tick line. It's just deer. We've got a gap in Zapata County that we talked about, money that Texas Animal Health Commission is getting from the state to put up a deer fence to try to stop that movement across the border, or through that arroyo in Zapata County and close up some gaps. The next page is really just graphically, that's where the remains of the 2006 outbreak are, and that's Zapata and Starr County. I just want to draw your attention finally on this to this last page, okay? You can see this is total infested premises, and you can see what's happened is with bangs, just like with ticks, we've started to flatten out, right? We started to flatten out, which means, and I've talked to the old timers, and they tell me that we're not too far off of what we see year in and year out over the last 70 years of this program, 20 to 25 to 30 infested pastures every year in and year out. That's just reflects that movement across that border, across that river. That river, is a permeable border, permeable barrier. So what I would tell you that what's really important is that next step, and that's that vaccine issue. To me, to Dee, when we vaccinate, put that vaccination barrier in, that's the next step to really affect this number, to start to push this down even lower. So we're dealing with fewer infestations, and when we find infestations, there are fewer animals, and they respond to treatment better. But this is the thing, this is how we turn this down now, is with vaccine. Any questions about ticks? That's just, I've got.
This vaccine is the newer version, it's not the Cuban. It's a newer version, has an affinity for the
Well,
better.
what's interesting is it actually is the same antigen, okay, the VM86 antigen, but it's this U.S. company and or this international company, and they use a different carrier, an adjuvant that's more effective. We're getting a lot better control in the lab in field tests over MicroPlus. We're still at 100% basically with annulitis, but with MicroPlus, where the Cuban vaccine is in the 30% range, we're above 60% control. Just a final word from something that Dee talked about, and Dee mentioned the funding for the laboratory. Let me just kind of flesh that out for you guys for a minute. For many years, over since 1954, brucellosis program, we built so many kind of intertwined kind of support mechanisms, and as Texas moved through this high-risk process and became the last outside of the GOIA high-risk brucellosis area, we've looked at those things, and what USDA has done is they've shifted to putting our brucellosis resources into that national surveillance program. That one, it changed and it varied, but we're at 1.7 million animals a year now. The idea is that the money saved by only testing 1.7 million, we're going to leverage against like the GYA and put more money into GYA and those kind of things. But as we shift away shift to this national program, we start looking at the pieces that are remaining, okay, from the old brucellosis surveillance, and that's things like we paid for the phones at the lab. We washed the lab coats. We provided an employee. We paid for shipping. I mean, $10,000+ a month worth of private samples. So that stuff's being pulled away now, okay? And I just, Dee and I have worked over that. We've had lots of discussions, positive, negative, but the reality is we're turning that page, okay? And so that's what we're pulling away. Dee is going to take is going to bridge some of the stuff for another year or two and look at when he decides it's time to pull away the state funding from certain areas. But that's the transition we're on, okay? And so we're going to make that smooth, and we're working with Dee and Texas Animal Health Commission. But that's the kind of the story behind the story. We're pulling back we're pulling back that money that we put in over the last 50 years. So, any questions about that? Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. Okay, Commissioner Simmons will give us a report on the audit subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning we had a review on the follow-up of the internal audit of the program records management, Region 1 office in Amarillo, Texas, federal funds management process, and the payroll personnel. Now, if anybody wants to go back and read a lot of good reading, but the thing that come out of it, everything was implemented that had been recommended. There was one partial on there that on payroll and personnel that was taken care of. It has now been implemented. So as far as I'm concerned, and the committee, that everything has been taken care of. If you'll turn over to page 7 in the front of the book, section 7, page 13. You'll see that we have, this is the 2014 audit plan, and quite a few items on there that will be done this next year that we looked at. And we did, the committee this morning approved this plan, and this time, it's for the full committee to approve the...
Do we have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the year of 2014 audit plan as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we approve the actions of the audit subcommittee meeting as discussed today. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Chairman, I would like to say that our auditors, Mr. Rufus Mundy, who does most of the audits, his mother passed away, and I'd like to extend our condolences to her. Mr. Robert Gonzalez, his associate, did the presentation this morning, so I'd just like to say that.
I agree, and well said, and Mr. Rufus was actually here this morning, and that shows his dedication, and we really appreciated that. So thank you. We'll get our laboratory report. Dr. Hughes Garza, good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners. As always, happy to come give you an update on the lab. I'll try to keep it brief, but as you've probably gathered, there's a lot going on at the lab right now, and I found as I was writing up my report, it was about twice as long as it usually is without even trying, so I'll let you read some of the details in the report that I submitted to you, but lots of things going on, despite a lot of the doom and gloom, budget kind of discussions and stuff. I think we've got a lot of really positive things going on at the lab, things that I'm pretty excited about. So as I talked to you about last meeting, we did make the decision to close the lab in Fort Worth. That lab is effectively shut down at this point. There's still a little bit of equipment and some of the larger items there that we're waiting on movers to come and bring some of that down to Austin so we can keep using it. But we have transitioned all of our samples over to Austin, and I'd say that went fairly smoothly. It has kept our staff in Austin pretty busy though, because right now our sample volume is really high, and we're doing that with the same staff in Austin that we've had. We did end up hiring one temporary employee for the summer just because we had so much going on in Austin, and that's actually worked out really well. We were lucky enough to get a really nice young man who's applying to medical school for a summer job, so he's made a great lab tech. Kind of wish I could keep him around, but hopefully he'll go on to bigger and better things. Amy Ramage, who was the supervisor of our lab in Fort Worth, is in the process of transferring to Austin. We're very excited to have her. She's been, this month, she's been kind of traveling back and forth, wrapping up loose ends in Fort Worth and trying to get her household moved down to Austin, and also helping us in her new role in Austin as quality manager. She's doing a lot of work to get us ready for the site visit that's coming up at the end of this month, where we're going to have a couple of auditors from the National Veterinary Lab in Ames, Iowa. They're going to come down and check out what we're doing and make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do. So she's been really instrumental in getting us ready for that, so I appreciate that. I mentioned we're running a pretty high volume in Austin right now. We're doing more than 5,000 brucellosis samples a day. A lot of that is slaughter surveillance, which we're looking at that dropping off at the end of this month. But right now we're still getting a lot of slaughter samples, in addition to our typical kind of steady stream of samples from veterinarians and some of the markets that are still testing. Probably about 8,000 samples a month from those two streams, and then we're still getting probably around 400 samples a month for tuberculosis testing, high-risk swine samples for pseudorabies and brucellosis. So all of those are kind of steady, and that's stuff that is going to keep us busy and keep us working, even though some of the slaughter samples are going to be going away. We are happy and pleased that we're now included in the National Slaughter Surveillance Program again. We were a little nervous that we were not going to be receiving any samples, for a while there, but we're anticipating just shy of 500,000 slaughter samples a year starting October 1st. And so I think, between our temporary lab tech is going to be, he's only going to be with us through the end of this month, and then we'll have the one federal employee that's going to be repurposed somewhere else in USDA, from what I understand, starting October 1st. I'm anticipating that our staffing is actually going to be pretty stable, that we'll be able to, have 2 fewer employees starting in October, and so I think that we're in pretty good shape to move forward and do the testing that we are going to be doing from here on out. I mentioned that we're getting ready for our audit as part of our membership in the National Animal Health Lab Network. We had to do, basically there's a yearly inspection of a bunch of your documentation, your SOPs, and kind of how you do business on paper, and so we've already had that review and passed that, and now we have a in-person site visit, which we are expecting to do very well on. So, a couple other things were our Bovigam test for TB. Because we're one of the labs that has a relatively high volume of TB samples coming in, the company that manufactures the test kits, they're looking to test out some new antigens and kind of tweak some of the things that are in their kit, and so they ask us to help them run some tests to compare that with their standard antigens. So we're working with them on that, and in exchange we get some free test kits, so it's a pretty good deal for us. In terms of our fee billing process, as y'all probably know, it was a big transition back when we first started charging fees for some of our lab services. That was something that our lab had never done before, and there was a whole process to kind of get that in place. I think we kind of knew that we didn't have a real good infrastructure for doing that from the get-go, and we've been working on improving it, and we've also taken some feedback from some of the veterinarians that submit samples to us, and we're working on trying to get a monthly statement out to the veterinarians on a regular basis. I've had a lot of help from our IT department and our financial services folks to try to improve that and make it a little more customer friendly, so I'm excited about that. And then, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, we are looking toward moving the Austin lab to a different facility early part of next year. So it's been interesting to try to keep things seamless in terms of our customers knowing where they're supposed to send samples. We've had people who just got used to sending stuff to Austin instead of Fort Worth, and now we're going to probably have to switch them over to sending them to a different lab. But we're working through all the details of that, and working with the Texas Facilities Commission to try to identify a building, make sure that we've got all the facility requirements we need. As you can imagine, moving a lab is a little bit more complicated than moving a typical office, and we've got some requirements that we're working with them on. So planning to keep us busy. At this point, I'll take any questions.
How many square feet do you need?
Let's see, we actually just submitted our request to them for what we're gonna ask for, and they're calculating it up based on the testing and the number of people we have. I can actually find that out for you, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller than our current facility, but even though we have fewer people than when our current facility was designed, because of the variety of testing that we do, I mean, there's a certain amount of space we need just to accommodate the different tests, but it probably will be smaller because we're going to be basically we're looking at 9 employees once the dust settles in October. So I'll find out for you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Now we'll discuss emergency management, get an update from Amanda Bernhardt. Amanda, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
Fine.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank y'all for having me this morning. I did go ahead, Dr. or Chairman, after you asked where our hurricane was, and put a requisition in for a tropical storm. Hopefully in a few weeks we'll get some rain.
We need rain.
Desperately. So good morning. I'm going to fill you in on a few of our emergency management projects that we've taken. The first 3 I'm going to discuss with you focus on foreign animal disease planning. The first of which is called a Resource Resiliency Assessment Program, which is RRAP for short, and it's a homeland security initiative. It's some grant funding that's designated to make sure that the local communities understand and are prepared for their role in a foreign animal disease response. An additional product from this project, and it's been nearly a 2 or 3 year long project, it'll be coming to an end sometime in March, is that the feeder industry will have templates for continuity of operations plans as well as some biosecurity protocols. We've remained linked into this project. We want to make sure that the local planning documents are up to our standards as far as what we want for the locals to have good tools to work with, and for the industry and all of the guidance that's been developed focuses and remains linked in with the latest USDA resources. So that's been a really interesting project, but it's been very time consuming. The second project that will also be concluded, I believe, in March is a joint carcass disposal project with West Texas A&M, and this is grant funding through the USDA. And it's one of the main goals of it is that we develop memoranda of understanding with our neighboring states for us to assist each other in a foreign animal disease outbreak when we need assistance with carcass disposal. I think the best result out of this particular project is that we are currently working on a plan for carcass disposal transport within the state of Texas. And it's always our priority and our first choice if we have to dispose of carcasses to do that on site when there's a foreign animal disease. But occasionally public perception, environmental issues, or conditions don't allow you to do that. And so you have to have procedures, protocols, biosecurity processes in place to be able to move those carcasses to a safe location for disposal. So that's one of the main results of this project. The third initiative that I wanted to visit with you all about today is our National Veterinary Stockpile Plan. I actually oversight Dr. Hughes Garza has made this project a dream for me because she's taken all the work onto herself. So I'm going to ask her actually if she'll step up and give us a brief description of it.
Just when y'all thought you were done listening. I appreciate the chance to just give a quick update on the National Veterinary Stockpile. I know Commissioner Winters is planning to come down and see what we're doing in San Antonio in October. We do still have the opportunity for others to come observe. If anybody's interested, just let me know. But basically, the National Veterinary Stockpile is a USDA program that would supply us as a state with resources if we did have a foreign animal disease outbreak, everything from the supplies that our responders would need as far as personal protective equipment, needles and syringes, and all those kinds of things that we need all of a sudden larger quantities of. They also have contracts for doing some of the activities like Amanda was talking about, cleaning and disinfection and carcass disposal. They also manage the foot and mouth disease vaccine bank, and so this is basically the way that we would get vaccine in the event that we needed it. Hopefully we never would. But so we've been planning this exercise for about 1.5 years. If you come down and observe it, what you're going to see is a bunch of people in a warehouse moving a bunch of stuff around. And on the surface of it, that is, that's basically what it's going to look like. But I think there's a couple of really important things that have come out of doing this planning. One thing is the interagency cooperation with our other state agencies. And if you look closely at those people that are moving stuff around in the warehouse, there's going to be some of them that work for USDA, some that are our employees, some of them with the Texas Division of Emergency Management, and it's actually their facility that they're letting us use, and the Texas Department of State Health Services. And I think in the process of working through what kind of support we would need from those agencies if we ever did have a big outbreak, I think we've developed some really good working relationships, and I think it's more of some of the other projects we're working on are kind of regionally based, and this is something that affects the whole state, and how the Division of Emergency Management would support us on a statewide basis. So I think that's a really good outcome of this. And also because USDA is going to send us 300,000 doses of simulated foot and mouth disease vaccine. It's been interesting to see kind of what that process would be like and how they would handle the distribution, and kind of where the bottlenecks are likely to be in some of these supply chains. So if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to catch me afterwards.
I'd like to add one comment to this. we're usually think of this, oh gosh, well, this will be a hoof and mouth outbreak. This is what we're dealing with. This sets the precedence, the blueprint, the plan for how we will deal statewide with any of these emergencies. And at our level, we're generally fairly comfortable that we've got good staff that know what the heck they're doing. The breakdown comes at the local and at the county level. And without exercises such as this, we cannot identify those communication breakdowns, the logistic breakdowns that will cripple our efforts if and when this is ever necessary to implement. And I thank y'all very much for the effort that you're putting into it and working with our federal counterparts to find these weaknesses. And it's important that we do this because it's too damn late when it's already happened. So thank you.
The National Veterinary Stockpile has been Dr. Hughes Garza said it was a 1.5-year commitment. She's glossing over there that this has been a 3 or 4 year commitment. It was one of the first assignments she undertook when she came to the agency. It involved her developing our plan, working with multiple partners within our agency, and lining out that before she ever began the 1.5-year long planning on the exercise. So she's done a wonderful job with that. Thank you very much. Kind of in closing, the highlights of our agency preparedness activities. During the regional director and our inspector work conferences for a number of years, and we continue to do it this year, we've provided an emergency management tabletop training for our personnel. We divide them into groups, they step off and they walk through what do you do in this scenario. We're getting low in scenarios, so I kind of need a disaster to freshen things up for me, but we walk them through different scenarios, and they share back and forth between their response experiences, and then we're able to pull them back together afterwards and really discuss what each one of them learned from the tabletop scenario through real world experiences. And we'll continue to use that initiative in our training. It doesn't cost a lot, and it does everybody knows what everybody knows when they walk out of the room. We have worked to ensure the agency remains prepared, whether it's for a hurricane or for a fire. Agency preparedness is agency preparedness. So one of the things that we have done is started updating all of our local response protocols for our personnel, our local planning materials for our communities. We've had our coastal staff begin to contact and reinvigorate their relationships with their coastal emergency management coordinators, their animal contacts within those communities, and to make sure that those communities are up to date on the processes that they have and that we are completely linked in with that process. So we focused a lot the past couple of months on the coastal areas. Statewide, we've been working with all of our communities. Our assistant emergency management coordinator, who is now in charge of local planning, has in October about a 3-day road trip of about 6 counties in the north central part of Texas. We'll be going to work with them on their animal issue committees, and I'm proud of him for, one, lining them up in such a way that it's efficient of agency time, but also to be able to make that many contacts in that short of amount of time. We have also been participating in the Texas Veterinary Medical Association preparedness workshops. We have a big portion of that we present about the state's role, and those workshops are designed to make sure that the veterinary community is prepared to respond to disasters within their own communities. I think this is very important. We've talked many times about how you get life back to normal after a disaster, to get the critical infrastructures back up and moving, and the veterinary community is that critical infrastructure for the animal world. So those have been really valuable workshops. We have one set up for Galveston, and we're trying to set one up for the San Antonio area. Nationwide, well, not really nationwide, but as far as state-to-state work that we've been doing, we've continued to participate in the Southern Animal and Agriculture Disaster Response Alliance, or SADRA for short. I actually stepped down as co-chair to be able to focus better on what our agency and our industries need in the state of Texas. But we still maintain a lead on a lot of the initiatives. And this group is from Texas all the way over to Florida, kind of up to Tennessee and Virginia, and then across. Recently, Arkansas just joined us. So it's planning how we share resources back and forth, state to state, during a disaster. And we have taken steps to look at the resources that we have as a state to respond to animal issues in a disaster. And we've begun to do what the federal government calls typing those resources. How are these resources qualified? What functions do they perform? How can they be used? And that's very important. One, it lets us know what we have. But secondly, it lets us know what our neighbors have. So if we need something in a disaster, we can do what is called an Emergency Management Assistance Compact, or EMAC for short. I promise next time I'll do that soon. I promise. But that process says we can borrow stuff from our neighbors. The reimbursement process is lined out and the rules are laid out. And we get stuff from our neighbors who understand us a lot faster than we can get stuff from the federal government and going through that requisition process. So it's neighbors helping neighbors a lot faster and a lot more efficient. And that is just a big project that we anticipate having done within the next couple of weeks. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me. Can I answer any questions? Did I knock you out, put you to sleep?
No.
Thank y'all very much.
Thank you for your great work.
We're good.
Item 10, Administrative Budget Status Report. Mr. Luna, good morning. Oh, Larissa is. Okay.
Well, I'm only going to introduce him, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. I told Stephen I was going to make an announcement this morning, but I didn't tell him I was going to preempt his time. As Dr. Ellis told you, we had quite a few retirements in August. 3 folks from the central office left. Our Director of Financial Services was one of them, key position. Debbie Metzler had been here 40 years when she retired, so as you can imagine, it left a huge gap. But we are really fortunate in this agency to have a lot of talented new folks coming up. And Stephen Luna was selected to be the Director of Financial Services and our Chief Financial Officer. So I wanted to introduce him before he got up and gave you the budget speech. He's still going to continue to do our budget, but he's got a lot more duties on his plate. So.
Congratulations, Steve.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'll jump right into it. First off, we've just started a new fiscal year and a new biennium, and like Dr. Ellis said, the legislature was kind to us. I'm going to give a little historical perspective so that when I rattle off some percentages, it'll help y'all see. But in the 2010-2011 biennium, the agency was awarded $10.8 million and $10.7 million respectively, for a combined total of $21.5 million for the biennium. In 2012 and 2013, however, the agency was appropriated $11.1 million and $11.2 million for a total of $22.3 million. But this $22.3 million was contingent upon receiving $10 million in collected fee revenue. So if you take that $10 million out of that equation, it left us with $12.3 million for the biennium. This was a 42% decrease from the 2010-2011 biennium. And I will say the agency has been very conservative, and we knew it was going to be tight. We've been real conservative in our spending and everything, and we're not drowning, which makes me really happy. It makes everybody else happy. But for this new biennium, we've been appropriated $8 million for 2014 and $8.1 million for 2015, for a combined total of $16.1 million. This is a 30% increase above last year, and only a 25% decrease from 2 biennia ago. So it's getting better. We have more money to work with to start meeting those challenges and everything. For federal funds, for fiscal year 13, we received, well, first off, the federal fund year runs on a different calendar schedule than the state fiscal year, which is very fun trying to calculate and everything. But for the federal fiscal year, we received $1.9 million in federal funds, and we also received $147,000 in grants, and this was all utilized in this last fiscal year, state fiscal year 2013. For 2014, state fiscal year 2014, we anticipate federal funds of $2 million for the federal fiscal year 2013. We don't know 2014 yet. That is still, we won't know that until we get closer to April 1st when that new year starts up. So we don't have an idea yet. We do anticipate at least $105,000 in grants for this upcoming fiscal year. We were all, like Dr. Ellis said, we were approved for capital budget purchases for fiscal year 14 and for 15. Each year we've been appropriated $300,000. And of that $300,000, $150,000 will be used for the purchase of trucks. And we will be discussing and asking for approval for that. We intend to jump on that and get those trucks as quickly as possible. And also $150,000 towards the acquisition and replacement of technology, because the technology we have has a useful life, and as it nears its life usefulness, we need to move on and get some new equipment, and that $150,000 will be used to utilize that. So the next section I want to discuss was fee revenue. In 2013, the Animal Health Commission realized $733,000 in fee revenue. This includes health certificates, CWD, herd status, lab testing, etc. Of that 733, the agency got to spend $394,000. A breakdown of that: health certificates were 65% of that, lab testing fees were 24%, the remaining 11% was the other diseases. In 2014, we estimate $722,000. And due to the way the rider is written in this 2014-2015 biennium, we anticipate to be able to utilize roughly about $450,000 of that. And then the breakdown percentage is almost identical to 13. Lastly, I want to discuss the full-time equivalents, which is the way the state describes the personnel, the positions that an agency has. And again, this is going to be, I'm going to give 3 biennia to give you a historical perspective. But in 2010 and 2011, we were appropriated 214 FTEs. In 2012 and 2013, we were appropriated 205, but 57 and a half of those were contingent on that $10 million. So in actuality, we only had 147 FTEs that we were able to work with. We closed out the year with 126 employees, 126 and a half. For this new biennium, we were appropriated 161 employees. Currently, to the start of this year, we're at 123. And as far as I know, there's at least 10 positions that are in the process, one stage of another, of being filled to get us as close to possible to that 161 again. That is all I have for the budget and the revenue and appropriations. Is there any questions that y'all might have?
Could you elaborate just a little bit on, if we raise $722,000 in fees, can you explain a little bit what the possible state portion,
Yes, sir.
what that is and why, and how it has to do with fee collection?
Yes, so whenever we sell a health certificate, the agency, they're $7 a piece. And so the agency, starting this fiscal year, we get to keep $7 of it. The last biennium, we had to split it between $5 went to the state and $2 came to the Animal Health Commission. So every time we sold a health certificate, that's the way it was split up. We had to figure all the splitting up out. Also, anytime the fee revenue, whether the lab testing, anytime the lab tested brucellosis, rat testing, whatever, they would send an invoice out. We would document it. When the money came in, we would document it and go into our bank account, allow us to spend it, to utilize it in whatever means we see fit. And just a side note, what we utilized all this fee revenue on was for the maintenance and gasoline for the state fleet, all the field fleet of trucks. All this fee revenue went almost 100% into maintaining gasoline purchases, maintaining the vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. But again, getting back to your question, up until August 31st, we were having to split the money, but partially between the state, partially between us. And so the total was $733,000 came in as revenue, but we had to split. We kept $394, the remainder went to the state. The way the legislation's written this year in the GAA, it's actually rather to our benefit. We're allowed to keep all the money that comes in up to $379,000. After that, it starts going to the comptroller or the state, up to $644,000. So everything below 379 and everything above 644, we get to utilize. And again, since we estimate last year or fiscal year 13, we totaled 733. We're estimating roughly 722, 730, somewhere in there again this year. So we anticipate for the agency this time, instead of 394, to receive 456. But it's just the way it's written in the GAA and how we have to split. Last fiscal year, we had to split stuff up between their money, our money, and all that stuff. And now, this year, we're actually being able to keep it up to a certain point.
But you would much rather deal with a budget that's built on general revenue funds than fee-based funds, correct?
Well, honestly, Mr. Chairman, the general revenue funds, I mean, it's a set amount, and so we know what we're working with. You know, and to be honest with you, I mean, that 456 that we anticipate, we can use it.
Oh, of course,
And
sure.
So you're not going to hear complaint about it. I mean,
I just don't want to share it, but we have to share it.
unfortunately, yes, sir, and the state wants their portion. So,
Okay.
But yes, sir, that's correct.
Any other questions? Dee, did you have something?
I was just gonna say, budget meetings are always entertaining if y'all wanna come to any of them.
Oh, okay.
He explains this to me over and over again, too.
I know. Well, welcome to your new position. It's glad to have you, and thank you. Are there any other, do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the administration budget status report as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the administrative budget status report. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now, Larissa, you're up. Good morning.
Mr. Chairman, how are you?
Great.
If you will remember, last commission meeting, we asked for delegated purchasing authority up to $25,000. So for your information, in tab 11, the first 4 pages are just that. They're reporting for your information all of the purchases we made up to $25,000, over $5,000. And then beginning on page 5 are the items that we're requesting your approval, consideration and approval of the items that are over $25,000 for this. And in that, you'll find the trucks that Dr. Ellis talked about, and information technology for $150,000 as well, $130,000 rather. I will be happy to entertain any questions you have.
I'd just like to say, I think that we need to continue on this vehicle situation. I've been feeding cattle in South Texas for many years and been involved with this agency for a lot of years, and it was good to see our inspector drive up to my feed yard in an official truck. These guys come sometimes unannounced, or a lot of times unannounced, and I think it's important that the industry knows who's on their property.
Yeah.
And it's very important, and these inspectors go a lot of miles.
Yes, sir.
And it was good to see. Margarito appreciated that. And I just think it's important.
Our plan is to, at some point, have a truck for every inspector. Now, I don't know if we're going to get there because our budget is always limited,
I
but that's
understand.
our plan.
But we can move forward, and the other thing is, it is a key factor for us to be more efficient. I really do, and Dr. Ellis and I have talked about this a lot. It's not just, we're being frugal. It's not just throwing money out there so our guys have new trucks.
Right.
Okay. Any other discussion? Could I have a motion?
Why'd we go with Chevrolet?
Hey, I don't have any, I don't know.
They're better.
We can talk about that later if you like.
They're leasing Fords and buying Chevys.
Okay, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the contracts and purchases request as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded, we approve contracts and purchases. Is there any further discussion? Then all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gene, we have you for 3 segments.
Yes, look at me like a snow plow. We're just gonna plow
All right.
through. But it's gonna take a while, because there's some drifts in here, as you can see. You know,
Okay.
and hopefully I won't forget some of the details I meant to call this in. But we'll start off with the first item, which is an enforcement order. This actually, FYI, as you can see from the time frame, it actually goes back to last summer, is one that I had initiated with a series of others that y'all have all already handled and resolved. It involves trichomoniasis permits. Literally, this was somebody kept buying bulls, and our inspector was very diligent about trying to ensure that he maintained them correctly, but he would take them and resell them, and it was a significant problem that we took this enforcement action. That said, in dealing with him, and I personally dealt with him, there was health issues in his family, so I would allow it to frankly sit for a period of time till we got to a point where we could deal with it. And at that point, he was not ready to resolve. He was not ready to accept the terms, and so I set it for a hearing and I explained to him. It went to hearing. He didn't show. It's what they call a default. He did not show, and I will say this was right before the last commission meeting, so they gave it back to me to go deal with it, but they had changed their process since I dealt with him at that time. So with that, we bring it back to you now. It's what they call a default order. Upon approval, I will then send it back to him to note the fact that this time it's approved, and we'll seek him to take care of the obligations associated with that order.
Okay. Yes, Steve.
I just point out here, you know, this is an example of why, you know, there was just a request for industry to help support us with an enhanced Class C misdemeanor authority for some of our enforcement actions. We basically got a guy here, he hadn't paid us. I'm not sure we'll ever get any money. We had to go to numerous legal hearings. We didn't have the opportunity to go to JP court on this because it's one of the diseases. And I would just respectfully request that before we go to the next session, maybe we can sit down again with our industry partners and see if we can refine the language that was not ultimately passed to help our agency more efficiently deal with problems like this. Because we could have, JP, we could have dealt with this in one day. And the JP court would have been dealing with collections rather than Gene and Mary in lawsuit, legal hearings and defaults and delays. It's just real inefficient, and it forces us to take one of these on when there were maybe 10 of them that could have spent their time on other things. So I just throw that out for y'all's awareness. Next year, when we start to think about possible dialogue on potential needs of legislation, we still really need to come back and hopefully talk about enhancing our authority so Gene and Mary don't spend literally months, weeks on one guy that hasn't paid us. And so that's all I want to say.
Now, well said, and it's something we need to work towards. Yes?
Gene, say we got an order against this guy, I mean, what do you got to do? We got to run him down and try to find, I mean, what can you do?
Oh, you know what?
Put
I
a
will
lien
say-
against his property, or?
No, I will take it and go to, I mean, if I don't get it resolved, and I will say I've had some dealings with him, and give credit is what I consider a gentleman. He really did, I will say, operate in a way that made it difficult to do our job, and that's the point I made, is look, we're here to do a purpose, and as you'll see from the change in the rules, there's a process, but you gotta play by the process, and that's really what this is for. If not, it'll go to the Attorney General's for collection, though I will say we don't have many, Dr. Ellis, most of ours through JP Court, which is up to the county, they get the fines, but it really does help at a local level to be efficient. That said, in the past, when I've had these and gone to the AG, they've been very helpful, and they actually chased down 2 of them and made them pay. Made them pay.
I mean, he didn't show up for the hearing, I mean, that guy's defiant, he's not gonna,
Yeah,
you
he told me he wasn't gonna show. I mean, he was upfront about that fact, so.
Give you-
I gave him credit. There was a health issue that I tried to allow him some latitude.
Is there a time, of this $3,000?
No, I mean, I'll send him a letter, I'll send him 2 on the second one, then I'll go to the AG's, and so we'll see. I don't know, to some degree, he won't just, because typically, to some degree, they don't want it hanging over their heads. I mean, as a practical matter, most businessmen recognize they want to resolve it and get it behind them, because they don't have to look over their shoulder every time. That's my hope. If not, ultimately, I do think we'll achieve our goal. He'll remember us. I don't think we'll have another problem with him again. I don't think you'll ever see his name again, so. And
You ready?
I think that's probably really what we're after, is to try to adjust some attitudes and ensure compliance. And I think we've got it here. Plus, it frankly serves as a deterrent for others out there that recognize they don't want to be in that situation. So permit your animals in accordance with the requirements, and it won't be an issue.
You ready for a motion?
I'm ready for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the final order against Bob Cody for violations of Animal Health Commission rules.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the final order against Bob Cody for violations of commission rules. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, I now bring to you the first of our rule proposals. This is involving trichomoniasis. Just going back to last commission meeting, we had a work session led by Commissioner Locke, involving which they annually do in terms of looking at this. This is an area, and get back to the Bob Cody thing, looking to try to allow a little more latitude in terms of people buying an animal and then turn around and resell it without necessarily testing it. And so this creates an avenue and opportunity in the process where, you know, you can do it, but we want to make sure they maintain the control on it. That's what the control program is, to ensure quality control that these animals are either being maintained in channels ended up in slaughter, or they get retested when they, and so, and this just allows for that, allows them to go home under a permit and then return if they want to sell it, if they believe that there's a value to it. And there were some that were doing it for that reason. So these are recommendations that came out of the actual work group. At the time, it was too close to the commission meeting, the last one, to actually bring them to you, but I bring them to you now. And then some cleanups in response to some of the recommendations that have been made by the group.
Mr. Chairman, I move the proposed amendments to Chapter 38, Trichomonas, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of this proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13A, Chapter 38, trichomoniasis. Is there any further discussion?
Just one comment. I've been dealing a lot with that, and it's really a good program. I mean, seems like every week I get a couple of them. So it's a thumbs up from my perspective.
And Commissioner Locke has done a lot of work on this, and we appreciate that. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
The next one I bring to you is for Chapter 41. This is the fever tick one. This is a response to the legislation that had been introduced, House Bill 1807 and passed, that'll basically broaden the authority for this program from, it's been focused traditionally on livestock and on dipping being the primary treatment form. Of course, with all the changes and stuff that one has in the treatment options out there, as you can see, the authority allowed us to broaden the rules. What I bring back to you is this, recognizing and bringing into the process for different type forms of treatment, including that doramectin, which is one of the forms of treatment that they've been using, as well as with ivermectin on the medicated form and used to address issues with feeder deer and stuff too, to try to address those. So that's what I bring back to you today for your consideration. If you have any questions.
No questions. Could I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 41, fever ticks, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Okay. You have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13B, Chapter 41, fever ticks. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
This next rule proposal I bring you is a very significant kind of rewrite and refocus. This is Dr. Ellison alluded to. It was from House Bill 3569. It literally was allowing the agency to create a regulatory, an authorized program for certain types of activities to ensure quality control, ensure that people perform certain things. You know, to this one I got to give a lot of credit to both Mary Ludiker, who really did write and came up and worked on this very hard and coordinated a lot. TVMA whose association was very active in providing us not only input, but their committee input involved in this to ensure that we were doing something that met not only the veterinary standards, but also to ensure the quality control. I know Dr. Vickers was very active in this too, as well as Dr. Evanston and stuff. So, with it, as you can see, she's written a very significant body to try to help address that. It's been broken into two sections. One on kind of the primary regulatory to get the various things, and then the other is the old authorized personnel program that follows our brucellosis program. We've always historically had an authorization process for brucellosis in the markets and stuff, and so it's contained in that. I open it for any questions, but I may have to ask Mary to come up here.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Gene said. Mary did a great job in crafting from scratch a new rule that truthfully many other states, I've got 10 to 15 state vets are going to, they want this when we're finished, and they're going to go back to their legislators and attempt to do the same thing. So I want to give Mary credit, but I also would just suggest at y'all's call, but you may want to consider a longer comment period, maybe 60 days instead of 30. This is a substantive rule that affects veterinarians in the state of Texas. Y'all aren't going to meet again the next 60 days anyway, and you might want to give them a little more time. That's my recommendation, and that's just an oversight. I intended to have that longer to start with, so it's up to you guys. But I suggest that.
I'd like to say one thing about Mary. She's really got some talent. She can talk like a vet and act like a lawyer.
Yeah, I tell you,
Yeah, and she can talk like a lawyer and act like a vet. So,
maybe it's built in the chameleon, I would agree. Yeah, she truly is.
What a combination.
Yeah.
Dangerous.
They call that conflicted in some cases, coming to terms with those two sides.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendment to Chapter 47, approved personnel located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code. As discussed today, I further move that notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Let's make
Would you like
it
to amend that
60.
to 60?
60.
Okay, do I have a second on the 60 day?
I second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve item 13C, motion Chapter 47, approved personnel. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, Commissioners, the next rule I bring to you also comes out of legislation and was passed during the session. This was House Bill 1521, and one of the things it did was, one of the issues that our statutes always had is when it came to being able to require disposal of a sick animal that was sick under one of our regulatory programs, or to pay indemnity was to have the necessary authorization. It had always been defined as livestock over the years. However, in order to ensure that should we have a critical poultry issue or domestic fowl issue that needs to go into requires our claim indemnity, they gave us the authority. They amended the chapter to add them both to it.
Gene, you're out of order.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got too quick.
I don't mean that legally out of order, just out of order and how they are in the book.
Disease traceability.
You were absent.
ADT's next.
Oh, man, I did jump way up. Sorry. I was
If
right
you
on.
want to finish that, we'll move.
I apologize. You're right. I did jump up there. I was writing down something. Yeah, this was Chapter 57 to go back. It would have been the last proposal. And literally what it was we were creating a new indemnification section to try to ensure that we had the necessary ability to buy birds. This comes up typically with not having the authority with backyard flocks where they may not be. The industries tend to try to take care and ensure that. I would like to thank James Grimm. He gave us some good insight and input in ensuring that we came up with something that would allow us to ensure quality control and address the issue.
So we're on 13F,
Yes.
Commissioners. So is there any discussion on 13F?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the new section in Chapter 57, poultry, located in Title IV of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. I further move that notice of the proposed new chapter be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13F, Chapter 57, poultry. Any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, thank you. I apologize. I'm going to go back to 13D. This is the new chapter of the animal disease traceability chapter we've created in response to trying to consolidate issues related to disease traceability and for the various disease programs. With this one, what we did is you'll see in the adoption, we were removing the change of ownership requirement that we had for identification and moved it to this chapter. The purpose of this chapter too is to ensure it's with the demise of brucellosis and stuff, that for these disease programs, there still is an ability through that to have traceability through identification. It follows somewhat the previous one, which is based on change of ownership. It also follows somewhat the federal model too, that you can't go to slaughter and stuff. If you take them to slaughter, you're not required to ID. Ours is a little more lenient than the federal standard, which is a 3-day turnaround to go to slaughter. Ours is 7-day. It does, as he noted, puts the onus on the buyer. They make that decision on, if they're going to slaughter within those time frames, they don't have to ID it. If they do, then they would turn around and be responsible for IDing it. And I think we'll do that in making it follow the federal, but a little more leniently in those regards to slaughter.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose amendments to Chapter 50, Animal Disease Traceability, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. Further move that notice of the proposed new chapter be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second. It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13D, Chapter 50, Animal Disease Traceability. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, Commissioners, the last proposal I bring you now is Chapter 51. These are our entry requirements, is 13. And basically what in this case is Dr. Ellis had alluded to in his report was providing for an exception to the trichomoniasis requirements for Texas bulls that go out of state to a bull station trials so they can return without a test, provided that they've been maintained in a controlled environment without any contact with female cattle. This follows once again the recommendations made of the trichomoniasis group and is just following up to codes that for our entry requirements.
This could be also for bulls that are out of state in a semen collection center, right?
Well, now, you talk about the that's above, that was already did, the CSS certified artificial insemination facility.
Yeah.
That's a little above, if you look.
Oh, okay.
That was actually a
already in
previous
the rule.
recommendation.
That was in the rule. That was already there.
This came out.
We've done that. That's right. That's right.
This is bull test station. This-
Coming
that's-
back
That's
in.
the change.
Guys, bulls go to
Yes,
another state
we're
and
adding
wants
it
to bring
because
them
I
home.
think
Now
it
they're
became
coming back.
identified as, wait a second, we're
Right.
not this, but we
Yeah.
have the same quality controls.
Right.
Keep refining it to make it work better.
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we propose the amendments to Chapter 51, entry requirements located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today. Further move that the notice of the proposed amendments be published in the Texas Register with a 30-day comment period.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 13E, Chapter 51, entry requirements. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Gene, before you get to item 14, we have 5 items up for adoption. I know we have some guests here from Montana. Welcome. The way we do this on these particular items, I know we have 2 requests for public comments. What we'll do is we'll have Mr. Snelson give give kind of a background information on it, and when we're on that particular subject, I'll ask you to come up and give your comment. Go ahead.
Well, this is the first subject up, and that is Chapter 35. It does 2 things. The first was just to acknowledge this was to remove, this is where our change of ownership identification requirement had been, as we move it to the ADP chapter and stuff, too, out of the brucellosis. So we were removing it. That said, the other issue was about the brucellosis risk and issue out of the greater Yellowstone area of the 3 states of Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho. And so, as you can see, it was proposed to apply to the whole state. We got quite a few comments. I know Montana, Dr. Zulinski's here to speak to his, and so he had some very extensive comments. He may be a vet, but I think he plays a lawyer on TV.
Okay, and with that, I would welcome Dr. Marty Zalewski. Is that how you pronounce it? He is with the State of Montana Department of Livestock. Again, welcome to Texas.
Thanks so much, Commissioner. And I think Dr. Ellis and I got it all worked out. We have 3 wolves, and 4 brucellosis positive elk in a van. We're going to swap them for some feral hogs. And some call it even Steven, and we're ready to roll. So, having said that, I really appreciate it. It is truly an honor to come up here and visit with you and elaborate a little bit on what our program is, so that way you can make the best informed decision. So, Dr. Ellis and I have visited on this topic on a number of occasions, and I think we all agree that there is an issue there. There is definitely a risk. I think we definitely disagree on what needs to be done about it to protect the state of Texas. So I really appreciate the ability to visit here. So, and certainly Dr. Ellis's intent is honorable, and it is exactly what I'd be doing in the state of Montana. So I don't in any way want to impinge or erode that intent. So Montana takes brucellosis extremely seriously. It's really our number one issue. We don't have a southern border. We don't have feral hogs unless the trade goes through.
Would you
We
like
don't have-
some?
We don't have pyroplasmosis.
Yeah.
I mean, really, we're a one-horse town. This brucellosis is really our number one focus, and we're able to focus all the resources on that problem. We've hired key staff. We have a veterinarian that specifically was hired for brucellosis, for the brucellosis program. There's Dr. Eric Liska, who's here with me. We've also hired a compliance specialist who goes through all of the herds, winds up looking at testing histories, find out who's tested, who hasn't in the last 12 months, try to find out, make sure we don't have one of those untested herds. In the last year alone, in the last fiscal year, we have tested 42,000 out of 60,000 animals that are in this surveillance area. So over 60% of the animals that are in our surveillance area have been tested just in a 12-month period alone. When you look at the statistics, when you start crunching the numbers, the likelihood of doing all that testing and not finding the positives is extremely small. So what I wanted to visit today with you about is I wanted to talk just a little bit about what brucellosis in wildlife means to us, kind of talk a little bit about the geography, explain what our regulations are, maybe touch on what it means to Texas from my perspective as far as what the risk to Texas is, what the rules proposes to do, and then I was going to propose some alternatives. So really the DSA in the state of Montana is in southwest Montana, and it is designed to identify the cattle at risk from brucellosis positive elk. So we know that brucellosis positive elk are in southwest Montana. They can potentially expose cattle. And so the key to identifying the cattle at risk is to identify where the brucellosis positive elk are. Right. And in fact, we've done a lot of work. We started with hunter elk surveillance kits, and we've gotten sophisticated enough where we look at the perimeter of our surveillance area, which is about 5% of Montana is all. And it does cover the border of Yellowstone National Park and go outward. We have started with hunter test kits, and at this point we look at the boundary, find out what we don't have tests, and we have a live elk capture study where they net gun elk from a helicopter. They test them for brucellosis, and they put a collar on them so they can track them for the next year. This is a leading study. It's not done anywhere else, and we can not only find whether elk in a particular area have brucellosis, but we also know where they go during the rest of the year. And the beauty of that is that hunter test kits harvest animals in the fall during their summer range, but our study and our tracking gives us information on where the elk are during their risk period, so during the time that they can abort and transmit brucellosis to cattle. So it really is a phenomenal project that we're really proud of, and it's a partnership with our Fish and Game Commission. Our DSA, as I mentioned, has 5%. It's 5% of the state. It has about 192, give or take, ranches that are completely circumscribed or within the DSA, and then it has another 80 that are seasonal. So they'll come in, they'll graze in the summer, and then they'll come out. So about 250 ranches or so. That, as I mentioned, the risk is seasonal. The risk is not in the fall, but it's in the spring during calving and abortion time. So how do we address this risk? We all know that there's a risk, and so how do we try to get it as minimal as possible for the benefit of our producers and the benefit of your producers? We have pretty rigorous testing requirements and regulations. First of all, we have an ID requirement, so there needs to be a permanent identification on any sexually intact animal leaving our DSA. So if the worst scenarios were to come true and a brucellosis positive animal came out of Montana, out of the DSA, you would know exactly where it is. You would know if it's a local problem or if it's an imported problem. Secondarily, we require testing before movement and before change of ownership, so before sale. So what you're looking at is if you have an animal that leaves the DSA, it needs to be identified as a minimum, regardless of whether it's sold, and then if it's sold, it needs to be, or it needs to leave, it needs to be tested. Now the testing requirements as far as age eligibility, this is important because for cattle that are going on feed or any of these other non-breeding uses, the testing eligibility age is 12 months. So anything over 12 months has to be tested. But for breeding animals, based on the USDA review that was mentioned earlier, we have dropped the age to birth. Basically, if you have a breeding animal, you must test her regardless of age when she leaves the DSA, when she's sold. So that's a very high bar for disease surveillance. Also, we have brand inspections. We have a strong county line brand inspection program. So if you sell or you move animals out of a county, we have 600 brand inspectors that do those inspections. The brand inspection department, the brand enforcement, is housed within the Department of Livestock. So I'm with Animal Health, and brand inspection is the other division. We work with the other division. We work with the other division. We work with the other division very closely together. We have 3 guys that supervise the entire state and supervise all the brand inspectors. They are paid half by animal health money and half by brand inspection money. So, I mean, we have a very strong enforcement program. So, what is the risk to Texas from Montana? And certainly my comments apply to the greater Yellowstone area, but they specifically apply to the state of Montana, and I want to be very clear here. The state of Montana has had 3 cattle herds that have been infected with brucellosis since 2007. Let me say that again, 3 cattle herds only in 6 years. Now, in full disclosure, we have a strong testing program. We've just picked up a couple reactors from a couple herds that we're chasing down right now. But basically, we've had 3 herds with 8 positive animals since our brucellosis program started. So we didn't have a brucellosis program in 2007. We had a herd that had 7 reactors. Since then, we've started a strong brucellosis program. We've had 8 reactors in cattle, or 8 positive animals in cattle. That's it in the entire state. We have a strong testing program, as I mentioned, and it's supported by the fact that when you first find the disease in a herd, you want to know how infected that herd is. If that herd is very well and is very highly infected, like the herd in Starr County or another one, you know that brucellosis has been in that herd for a long time. You know that it's just that guy was under cover for quite a while. When we did the math on Montana herds, our infection rate at detection is 1.1%. So that means that when you find that brucellosis herd and you say, wow, there's a new one, then you do all that, then you test all the animals and you say how many animals are infected, it's 1.1%. So that tells you that we're doing a lot of work and we're catching them early. And therefore the risk to Texas is not significant. One of Dr. Ellis's concerns is the latent heifer syndrome. Latent heifer or sleeping heifer syndrome is a situation where you have a breeding animal, you have a brucellosis positive female, she calves, and she basically makes a heifer calf, and that heifer calf, even though she was birthed from a positive female, remains negative for much of her life, and then when she hits puberty or calves, then she pops positive. So she's like a ticking time bomb of sorts. And there's definitely some concern about that. But those animals are very rare. First of all, if you have 100 positive females, and those 100 positive females have 100 heifer calves, 2 to 3% of those may be latently infected. So that means only 2 to 3% of the females that you would test, of the offspring that you would test, would stay negative even though they're infected. Am I making that point? Basically, it's a very rare deal. In the state of Montana, we have not even had an infected female that's had a calf in any of our herds. Again, barring the current investigation right now. So what I'm saying is the risk of latent heifers is minimal, if not negligible. And in fact, in the comments that I've included, the USDA has submitted a letter, an email from the Western Region Associate Director that went through to his local EPIs in Fort Collins, as well as in the greater Yellowstone area. And they gave me a letter that said the risk of latent heifers is not significant and not certainly doesn't warrant additional regulations. So that brings me to the rule proposal. To me, certainly the rule that is being proposed would address latent heifer syndromes. If there are latent heifers that would come out of the greater Yellowstone area in Montana, it would find them. And again, we come back to the intent of the rule and wanting to protect Texas. But to me, it's like using a bulldozer to swat a moth. I mean, ultimately, all the animals that are coming into Texas for breeding from the DSA are being tested already. So you're only looking for this tiny percentage of animals that test negative on the first test leaving Montana, and then would somehow test positive after puberty when they come into the state of Texas. The rule proposes that DSA cattle from the state of Montana would wind up being quarantined for up to 20 months after they arrive into the state. So if you have a 6-month-old heifer and that animal comes into Texas, winds up being bred, right, she remains under quarantine, and then she must be tested between 30 to 90 days after calving. That's an 18 to 20-month quarantine that is being placed on the state of Montana animals for a risk that is negligible, but certainly minimal based on the number of positive herds we've had and the number of positive animals. This kind of regulation is unprecedented, and by unprecedented, I mean that even in the heart of the brucellosis wars, there has never been a test that follows an animal after she goes to the new destination for up to a year and a half. I mean, it is very extensive. So, one other significant concern I have about the current draft is that it requires the monitoring of animals for this extended period of time in the state of Montana as well as other states. So what happens if the way the rule's written is a DSA animal that goes into the state of Nebraska, the state of South Dakota, the veterinarian would need to notify the state of Texas whether that was a DSA animal, and if it was a DSA animal, then it would need to comply with the rules as far as testing. So you have a situation where DSA animals, to follow the letter of this rule, would need to be tracked for their lifetimes. There's not a time set limit on this. For their lifetimes, as they leave the state of Montana, the DSA, travel within Montana, have maybe several calves, and then other states would need to know whether it's a DSA animal when they write the health certificates. Now, I understand that practically speaking, it's not going to be possible. So what the rule does is it either expects that other states will adopt the rules to follow Montana DSA cattle like Texas requests, or it'll result in other states ignoring Texas regulations, which I don't think would be the position that I would be in, want to be in Montana. So to sum it up, I believe that this rule is a dramatic, is a scaling up of government work and government regulations without being justified by risk. It goes so far beyond what the federal government requires out of DSA cattle and the Montana's brucellosis program that you can't even see the federal regulations from what this program is. I mean, it is that the requirements are significant. And what I would suggest is that when requirements are so significant that they're so onerous that producers will not import Montana cattle, I don't think it's a regulation. I think it's coming close to an embargo. Why would if I was a Texas producer and I had cattle, or I wanted to buy cattle, breeding cattle, Why would I take them from Montana if I had a year and a half brucellosis quarantine, as opposed to taking them from Oklahoma, from North Dakota, from Nebraska? So to me, this will shut down the imports of Montana breeding cattle into the state of Texas. If the same standard for brucellosis was that Texas would apply to, if Montana would apply the same standard for brucellosis risk to TB pyroplasmosis, you would see that you would have horses that all Texas horses would have to be tested within 30 days for pyroplasmosis. Cattle will have to be tested for TB after they arrive for 6 months to a year or more because of the incubation period of TB. What I'm saying is that moving cattle is an inherently risky business. We do our best to minimize that, but we cannot get that risk to zero, just like Texas cannot make that risk zero for cattle coming into the state of Montana, as that North Dakota TB cow is proof of. So what I would suggest is a couple things. One is, I think, education. I think producers need to be well aware of the risk that they take when they move horses, cattle, sheep, llamas, exotics, you name it. Folks need to be aware of brucellosis just like they need to be aware of other diseases. And I would suggest that that working internally to certainly find any brucellosis herds would be a good use of those resources. And lastly, I will just close with saying that I would request that you would put trust in our state efforts to get rid of brucellosis and to minimize that risk, just like we put trust in the Texas Animal Health Commission to keep our state safe from your imports, unless for whatever reason we give you reason to think otherwise.
I have a question. You mentioned that you're netting these elk and testing them. What kind of an infection rate are you finding in the elk that you're testing?
Thanks. So that's a great question. So we've done an annual capture study 3 years running, where we capture 100 elk each time. The first time, I believe, we found 12 elk out of 100, just on the boundary of our DSA, and then we moved our boundary of the DSA because we said, oh crap, obviously we're not correctly identifying all the animals at risk, so we moved that line. The next year, we found six out of 100 that were positive, that were seropositive around the boundary. So then we expanded the boundary all the way to the interstate on the western side of our DSA. And then the last year that we've done the study, January of 2013, we didn't find any positives. So that line will stay the same. So
what are you doing with those positives?
Those
Is
positives
running free, or?
Yeah, those positives are free for the time being, and I argued to keep them alive because it gives us good information for where those positives are. It tells us whether those animals have vaginal transmitters, so we know whether they abort or they calve successfully. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks swoops in on those, and they call them VITs, and they try to culture those to see if those abortions are infectious or not. And then we also have a good idea of where that reproductive failure, if it is, where it is. Is it on cattle properties, in the forest, is whatever. So there's just a treasure of information that you get from those 4 or 5 positive animals that you couldn't get in a laboratory setting. So that's why we keep them alive. And then at the end of the study, they're to be removed.
So theoretically, you just cited like a 6% infection rate. You've got in these elk herds, they move around a lot. You've got coyotes and wolves that probably could drag these aborted fetuses around and everything. So there's a potential for exposure for anybody that has these elk running on their property at any given time for that cow herd.
With one caveat, if I may, and that is we have a ton of public land in the state of Montana, and it's the topography is actually quite steep in many areas. So what happens is you have the cattle properties that are typically on the flats and the river bottoms and the prairies, and then you have the elk ground that's a lot of times in the forest. So it's not like those elk are on private property typically, and in fact, oftentimes those elk are on BLM or Forest Service land. So that's correct.
But don't they, like in the winter when they're making hay and stuff, or they have hay stacks, don't a lot of these elk come down into that lower country and come
Go-
on the properties and stuff, to
Thanks.
forage on the haystacks and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously concern over elk and cattle commingling during the winter and spring, and that is the reason why we have our testing requirements. But we have worked with producers through herd plans. So the herd plans describe, let's say, okay, keep hay and hay storage areas away from elk, fence if need be, test if there's commingling between elk, those kind of things. So there are practices. It's not like they come down on the flat, they squirt out, 5 fetuses and they take off. I mean, this is an area that a producer is able to evaluate that commingling or that contact and then contact us as we go forward. And those folks also have, keep in mind that all of those herds within that surveillance area have not only a change of ownership test that applies when you sell an animal to another person, but also they have a pre-slaughter test. So if they send an animal to slaughter, we don't rely on the scaled down federal requirements. All those animals before slaughter have to be tested. We pay for it. To get in additional cooperation, we pay producers $2 per animal tested for brucellosis if it's DSA related. So we try to get a lot of buy-in, and in fact, by our testing numbers, you can see that we've done that.
What about a vaccination requirement on the replacements and
Yeah.
even an adult vaccination if it's one of these infected herds that you mentioned?
Yeah, thanks, Doc. There is a brucellosis vaccination requirement on the entire 4 counties that include this surveillance area. Every animal has to be a vaccinate, which means that the calves have to be vaccinated. And if you bring in a non-OCV, non-calf foot vaccinated animal, then she needs to be adult vaccinated. So there is a vaccination requirement for the entire area and extending it further. And we pay for adult vaccination.
Okay, Dr. Zalewski, I have a couple of clarification, questions for you, because I'm always concerned when I hear the terminology about stopping trade, because we're not here to stop trade. It's the last thing we want to happen, in my opinion. If I understand this correctly, the original proposed rule, as proposed originally, was the whole state of Montana. And this rule that we're looking at adopting is strictly the DSA, am I correct, Dr. Ellis?
Correct.
Which is 5% of the state.
Correct.
Specifically, your comment about stopping trade, was that intent to say stopping trade from the state of Montana or stopping trade from the DSA, the 5% of Montana?
I appreciate that.
And that, I just want to clarify that because I want to make sure that we're all understanding there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Commissioner. So what I meant directly is DSA, because certainly those folks in the DSA are going to be impacted. But it's a little bit like cancer. It doesn't matter if the rate of cancer is 1/10 of 1% if you're the one with the cancer. So, folks that are going to be impacted and potentially will lose markets. However, the way this rule is written is that these DSA animals would have to be followed out of the DSA. If there's a DSA animal in eastern Montana, it would need to meet the same requirements by having a post-entry test. And what I'm saying is these animals leave our DSA, they're in full compliance, we have a strong program, we don't have the ability to follow those necessarily. We have barely the ability to follow those in the state of Montana, perhaps, but we certainly don't have the ability to follow those in other states.
Okay. How would I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Dr. Ellis and our EPI staff that studied this, is our concern as specific with the cattle that are throughout the state of Montana that may have come from the DSA, or is our specific concern the animals that are exported out of state directly from the DSA? Does that question make sense?
Let me try and answer that philosophically. Our concern is the animals coming from the DSA. They all are coming out vaccinated. They're all coming out with 1 negative test. But we know the incubation period for brucellosis can be more than 30 days or whatever the negative test is. So the thing that's getting twisted around here, and I think is getting blown out of proportion, to be quite honest, is we actually attempted to give them another way to not have to deal with this by saying, all right, if you come out, if they've been out more than 60 days and they're negative on a second test, we're not going to make you do anything when you get to Texas. That's been turned around to say, you're tracking our cattle forever. When the truth is, if they came out of the DSA, the rule just says if they've come out of the DSA and one negative test, we want to test them again at no charge, at a flexible date, at working with our producers when they pen them in the fall or the spring. We're not going to send them any orders. We're just next time you get them in the pen. So what's turned around, and I'm the one that caused this part of the problem, is when you thought, because if we hadn't have done this, you could have rightfully said, well, you're only picking on the cattle from the DSA that are still in Montana. What if they're in South Dakota? So our intent was, if cattle leave the DSA that are test eligible by the proposed rule, it doesn't really matter where they're at. If they went to a sale barn in South Dakota, they still just came out of the DSA. And so what we tried to capture was the intent, which is cattle coming out of the DSA that have only had one negative test right before they drove out of the DSA are at risk, and we think they should be retested if they come to Texas. You know, with that said, and we've had dialogue and discussions, it's not our intent to question the origin of cattle from other states. We're not going to ask everybody that brings in cattle from South Dakota, North Dakota, Nebraska, wherever, hey, were these ever in the DSA? And we're going to take the veterinarian's word in Montana as well. If the Montana vet writes on that health certificate, these cattle weren't in the DSA, we're not going to look that up. It is an honor system. What we felt was important was that we just put notice out there that if you know they came from the DSA and you know they never had but one test or no test, depending on what state they're coming from, we want to retest them if you decide to bring them here, and we'll work with our producers to do that in as economically friendly manner as possible without putting any burden on their management practices. And that's the intent. So it's cattle from the DSA is what we're concerned about that only had one negative test, and they could have been exposed the day before they were tested, and they won't test positive. Latent heifers are a small part of it. I'm more worried about cows than I am latent heifers, I'll be quite honest with you. A cow that was open, when she ingests the brucellosis organism, may take 6, 8, 10 months to seroconvert. They may not. They may do it in 2 months. But one negative test on these animals is not enough, in our opinion, the respective opinion of our epi staff, both state and federal employees. You know, if I can just run through, I've made a couple of points here. I didn't really want to debate, but I do have some comments. So the macro environment that we're operating here is the surveillance system in Texas is eroding. It's not going to be as good. Less slaughter surveillance, no market surveillance. The last 5 infected herds in the state of Texas before the Starr County, we all believed the latent infected heifers was the source of infection. We found a GYA isolate in an infected herd in 2005. I personally managed that herd, and we just knew he bought some recips. We didn't know where he got them. There's a cow that was exposed in the GYA that cultured it. So we don't think one test is enough. There are precedents in other diseases. Tuberculosis quarantines are annual tests for a number of years after we release the quarantine. We retest cattle coming from Mexico. Breeding cattle get a retest for TB, brucellosis after they get here. So we have, we have that. If these had been, if they were a Zone A instead of a free state in that DSA, there would be more testing requirements. We're not intending to track them for a lifetime, and as I said, the veterinarian writes on the health certificate a statement to the fact they've either been tested or they've never been to the DSA. We're not going to check it. We don't have any intention of doing that. You're just on the honor system, and we believe it's important to be consistent for the DSA cattle wherever they're located in the United States, not just in your states. We're actually trying not to pick on you guys. I think in regard to the precedent for disease eradication follow-up testing, USDA has made it clear that they are no longer interested in eradication and enforcement of disease programs, and they're moving these requirements and desires back to the industries and the states involved. So the fact that USDA is not requiring any testing, I don't give that any credence, because I'll tell them straight up, you guys have left us on this eradication program for TB and brucellosis. We know there's a wildlife reservoir. We know there's an ongoing. I don't know what the prevalence is in bison, but I suspect it's much higher. And the percentages that you stated are around the edges of the DSA. That was right, 6% around the edge of the DSA, not interior. So you could assume that maybe in other locations it's even higher than 6%.
That's correct.
Okay.
It'll vary between
So,
0 to
y'all's, there's 2 or 3 things I would just want to say right up front that we are committed to reevaluating this. We're not committed really. I don't think we have enough information to pull Montana out of the concept. The truth is that I've said it. You guys are at the top of. You guys have, in my opinion, I'm not going to say you have the best program. I don't want to impugn the other guys. They're not here. You guys are doing a lot, more probably than they might be for different reasons. I'm not impugning those guys at all. But there's still a couple of basic tenets. It's possible that producers in your DSA have not tested, intentionally are trying to fly under the radar. I know we had them in Texas at the end of our eradication program. The last few guys, they were hiding from us. They knew they might have had a problem. Your herd plans, as I understand it, for when a producer knows his cows have come in contact with elk, is still voluntary, right? That they're supposed to tell you guys, hey, our cow was with the elk and blah blah blah.
Herd plans are voluntary, but producers without herd plans are subject to all the testing regulations. So really, herd plans just give them some variances. So they're still subject.
Yeah. So I mean, I think Marty, you guys are doing great. I don't want to debate. I mean, the truth of the matter is, I'm following up on a recommendation of our experts in Texas, state and federal. I agree with them. I'll be honest. I let them. If they'd come back and said we don't think it's a good idea, we would have never been to this step. And I don't know if you guys want to let Dr. Schwartz talk at any point. I am completely sympathetic to why you're here, and I'm very open-minded. I believe to come back in a year or 2 and revisit this, and maybe at that point say, okay, Montana, you're good, you're out of the deal, but one of the other 2 states, you guys were very uncomfortable with your progress. I don't want to judge those guys. They didn't come, and maybe they didn't come because they had a conflict or budget. I don't want to judge that, but obviously Montana's here, and so you're hearing a good response, and I'm not questioning you're saying. That's just our perspective, that after the cumulative macro environment that we're dealing with lack of regulation, some risk, lack of surveillance, the ability to do this, we hope, impact our Texas industry with very minimal intrusion. At their own, whenever they're ready, we'll test the cattle. As far as latent heifers, most of the time, in my experience, a latent heifer will serial convert before she calves. I don't believe most of these heifers are going to be quarantined that long. But we can work that out individually. If a producer wanted to test them when their bulls turned out, test them again in 3 or 6 months, we can do whatever they want to do. It's not our intent to get into anybody's business. It is our intent to try and do the best we can to ensure that we don't accidentally get an infected animal in Texas and then we don't have any way to catch it. It could actually spread, and then we could have multiple herds involved, multiple traces, and it's a philosophical, just a different perspective on what is acceptable risk, and I entirely respect y'all's position, and I'm not questioning at all. I think what we're telling you guys is we're not real comfortable with the risk right now. We'd like to continue to evaluate it. We'd like to look at the USDA report. We'd like to, I think the other states, they ought to, we ought to get a little more formal. You gave us 50 pages. Some of those other guys didn't. I'll just leave it at that. So it's a little confusing from our perspective. And with that said, I'm open-minded to revisiting this, but I don't think, Andy, you're not backing off, right? You guys, in fact, they didn't want to back off on the whole state. I'll just tell you all that. The EPI group wanted to do the state. I backed off to DSA. So if you have any dissension in our side, it's that they wanted to be more conservative than we are. So that's my statements. And you're not wrong, but we're not wrong either, I don't think. It's just, you know what I mean?
I think as chairman, I can give you my assurance that if there's some language that's in here that gives the interpretation that we're trying to pick on anybody or impede trade, and if we can clean this up soon, we are an industry-driven agency here, but we also listen to our state veterinarian and his staff. And so we have to find the happy median there. And we meet 4 times a year, sometimes more. You have my assurance that we can continue if approved today. If we need to make some changes, we can do that quickly. I think Commissioner Jordan had a comment.
A couple comments or questions. I think one thing we look at this, that if you're one person today is buying heifers and in particular out of that area,
I think if you bring them down here and you've been breeding them and then you resell them as a bred heifer, that will probably would stop, because that testing requirement after you breed her and sell her would have to go to the next person. So at the sale or Country Trade USA, Ernie, you got to test this heifer now, this whole group of heifers after they all calve, possibly for brucellosis, whatever, because of the quarantine. Now, I think as a buyer, I would not mess with that group of heifers. Now, if you're just there to keep them, and say Brandon buys them, I'm going to ranch them all the way through, he may be willing to take the risk. So I think we understand that particular area, I think, will slow down as far as heifers coming in here because of that regard. Now, the question I have is, I can put it together right quick, is I'm trying to understand the concept how you track these. A lot of Montana heifers, and I'm not sure where they all come from, end up in Oklahoma wheat fields, and a lot of them are offered to the state of Texas after they go there in the spring of the year to be bred. And I don't see how anybody's going to trace those heifers when they mix them from Montana. They mix them from different parts of Montana, some from Wyoming. They throw them all together in those wheat fields, and they offer them for sale to different customers in Texas or wherever it is. My question, I guess, here is how would you even track those, that those heifers have to be retested at any point in time? And that's my question, because the first thing I can see is those guys in Montana saying, let's send those cattle to Oklahoma. They get lost there, basically, because they don't have the same requirement Texas has. Then we can move into Texas very easily. And so we've avoided this whole concept we're after is basically you go around the edge to get back in here.
Yeah, that was a substance of my recent comments, which is basically you either, by putting this requirement, you either ask other states to track Montana DSA animals throughout really their lifetime, until, for feeders obviously younger, until they go to Texas, or if they go to Texas, or you're admitting defeat and you're saying basically they won't be tracked and they're going to ignore a Texas regulation, which from my perspective, I would not want to put a Montana regulation in place that I knew was not going to be honored by anybody.
Well, I'll just say, you know, my understanding is that the 3 state vets have all given me their assurance that if this rule passes, either implicitly or explicitly, they've given me their assurance that they'll try and help make sure that the intent is met. We have the same issue with TB right now. We require rope and steer, Mexican rope and steer, to have a TB test, and they consistently circumvent that by going to New Mexico or some other state that doesn't require a test, and then they come in as a beef animal and not as a Mexican rope and steer. And so that's inherent. You're like Marty said, you either just say, well, we're not going to mess with it because it's not going to work, or you throw it out there and hope that you get voluntary compliance, and which is what I would hope happens here. And you know, that's all you can do. I mean,
But we thank you so, oh, do you have one more comment?
One other question back to the elk, Marty. Are you card testing them on the spot after you have them caught with the net?
Yeah.
Why are you not sending those positive to the food bank or something? Is that a...
Yeah, no, so, yes, we are card testing, and card test is a rapid test for brucellosis. We are card testing those animals in the field. We're also doing another test, so we're getting a pretty good idea of whether they're reactors or not. But again, the outcome from that study is what we're looking to do. You know, do they carry to term? Do they abort? If they abort, when during the year do they abort? Do they abort on private ground or on forest ground?
So they're alive and turned loose again then?
Correct. Well, and they're collared, and then they're going to be eliminated from the study down the road. So, Chairman, if I could make just one comment.
Yes.
regarding Class A status, that's as far as Class A went away. That's true. You know, states are not really being downgraded right now. If the new cases of brucellosis are within a brucellosis management area, such as in Montana, we are able to address those on a case-by-case basis, and it doesn't impact the state status. But what I'd say is that even if we were Class A or Class B, which is even lower status, we would not be subject to testing requirements. Our cattle would not be subject to testing requirements as are being proposed today. So again, I feel that it's a more significant regulation and restriction that is warranted by the risks in Montana.
And one other question, is there a requirement of mandatory testing of each herd every 3 years at least to see if a herd that's, I know it's the slaughter cows going out there, but let's just say a young herd starts out, all heifers, and they're there for 10, 15 years. If they don't recull very many cattle or whatever, is is there any test requirement? Have y'all got that put in place?
Yeah, that's a great question.
In the DSA.
Yeah, in the DSA.
DSA.
So the question is, do we have a scheduled every 3 year, let's say every herd gets tested in the DSA? And what I'll say is that used to be the case. We had an every 3 year requirement. Our industry asked us to reconsider. And what we did is we sunsetted that, or we stopped that regulation for this reason. We said, okay, fine. If you don't want to do a herd test in your herd, that hurts you. That hurts you, that herd owner, because you are allowing that brucellosis disease to fester in your herd and potentially go from just 1% to 20 or 30%, and then you would lose much of your herd to brucellosis. So what we said is the herd test protects your own operation, but the purchase test protects the buyers of your cattle. So we kept the purchase test, and keep in mind that all those guys that don't have, all those folks, and first of all, a number of folks do a whole herd test on an annual basis or every other year. So the only other thing I'll say is that even those folks that don't do an annual test or a whole herd test have cull cow testing, and they also have change of ownership testing. So there is still surveillance going on, as shown by numbers. Last thing I'll say, I apologize, but I just had Dr. Eric Liska and his compliance person look at who did and who didn't submit tests throughout our entire DSA for the last 12 months. And we identified a handful of producers that have not submitted a test in the last 12 months for brucellosis. And then we have followed up with those folks to find out why that is. And in some of those, they've submitted tests, but they were under a different brand name. In a couple of, in a bunch of them, they were very small herds that didn't submit slaughter samples, et cetera, et cetera. And we have identified some issues, some compliance issues with our sale market. So what I'm trying to say is this is a very active program. We are 100% focused on it. And so nothing is airtight, but we're working as hard as we can.
What if we, I'm just throwing it theoretically out there, and Dee, you can respond to this. If this applied to and I'm just using this term like we used to have, certified free herds, that way it's really not you all pushing it, the market would be pushing it if they wanted to come to Texas. If they're certified free herd, those calves can move without a test.
I think that's probably an oversight that we didn't include that in there. If you have a certified free brucellosis herd in the DSA, we would accept animals out of that.
And because if you got that many of them
How
doing
many
it,
are there?
reward those
You
people
have
for
any,
doing it.
That's the question. We can, that's certainly, I mean, that's.
That was gonna be
again,
my
I
next
didn't- We
question.
just didn't put it in the rule, but we accept certified free dairy cattle. We require dairy cattle to come into the TB test unless they're from a certified free herd or accredited free for that program. So that would be an obvious concession that would be easily
Do
accommodated.
you have any of those in there?
Yeah, the reason I'm
Well, they're not. They don't have, I'll just let him
Yeah,
answer.
no, the reason I'm hesitating here, while I appreciate the offer, the reason I'm having a introspective moment is that one of the two reactors that we're chasing down from right now is from a brucellosis certified free herd. And what I'm trying to say by that is a test once a year doesn't really protect because of the
You're right.
weird way that the elk brucellosis gets transferred from wildlife. Just because you have a test in October doesn't mean that you're free to go until the following October, because you've had the entire elk brucellosis abortion and calving season. So, in fact, yeah, I mean, there should be a reward from folks that do testing, but that doesn't protect the receiving state. What protects the receiving state is testing those animals before they wind up selling, and that's how we found a number of our reactors in the state of Montana. And again, that rate of reactors is super low. So I really appreciate
But
it.
you still be testing, you still got.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it may be an 8 or 10 month interval, see,
Which
from the
that's-
last herd test.
That's the intent of our post-entry test, is to capture that. I mean, you're right, the certified free herd, there still could be incubation going on there. It's just less likely. I mean, I just made a call off the top of my head. The truth is, there's still a chance.
Still be requiring testing, even on certified free
Yeah,
herd,
we
you're
certainly
requiring them to be tested at the time they leave the state, even though they've been tested, let's say, in October, and they leave in June, you're still requiring another test even 6 months later, if they leave that
Correct,
area.
no one's exempt. There is a window of 30 days in the spring. So if you have a test more than 30 days, you need to be tested in the fall.
So we'd be talking about is
It's a
certified
long-
free herd, but then there's still, if you leave that area, you've got to test whether
Well,
it's 60 days or go.
we could still do the test, the interstate test on the certified herd animal,
That's what he's saying, do it
and
just like.
have
you are
one
now.
test. Would that
Could I make a suggestion, in that this is good dialogue, and it could be something that we could have for our next meeting as a proposed amendment, if need be? Or is it substantive enough to where it could be, Gene, could it be amended in such a point, and maybe not even using the word certified free herd, but purchasing cattle from Montana and the DSA that have come from herds that have had annual tests?
I'm a little, my recommendation is it be an amendment at the next meeting, because
Okay.
my EPI's guys, he said.
I agree.
I just gave you an answer off the top of my head.
Okay.
And I
Well,
would
then-
prefer the deep thinkers actually come back and say, well, you realize you forgot.
Okay.
The truth is, the annual test lowers the risk. That's the bottom line. It does not protect against an incubation or recent exposure, which is why we put the rule in to begin with, to get another test sometime after they leave the DSA, because as long as they're in the DSA, they're in the region for potential exposure, and it doesn't matter if they're certified free or not. So can I kind of retract it?
No. All I'm saying, and that's why I asked the question,
Go for an
Dee, it could,
amendment, you know what I mean?
then my suggestion would be that the EPI team between now and the next meeting can study this and look at whether the combination of a herd in the DSA that has had a yearly test, a whole herd test, plus the final, the second test, that then they may change their recommendation towards you for at least the state of Montana.
Get the number and all
So,
that kind of thing.
Have an effective program, then bypass it.
Perfect. And and the dialogue is wonderful. We do have one more public comment from Mr. Palmer, representing the Matador Cattle Company. Mr. Palmer, would you like to say a few words?
I'll be very brief, because a number of the things that I was going to mention, y'all already discussed, but I would like to say thank you right quick. It's not often that an old $30 cowboy gets to speak to a distinguished audience like this. I gotta say something.
There's a few of us that are $30 cowboys. If we get a raise.
That and Dr. Ellis has left the room, but if you're in a position that I happen to be in, and you think about the discussion that's gone on here, I want to say thank you to this commission, to Dr. Ellis, his team, for the USDA, for my friends from Montana. Everybody here's intent is to protect people in the industry, and I thank you for that. No matter what the outcome, we all have a similar intent for the outcome. So I wanted to say that. What I want to speak just real briefly, because y'all have already talked about most of the things I had, is that the company that I represent, we ranch in 3 states. 2 of those states being Texas and Montana. We have the privilege of our ranch in Montana being within the DSA. From time to time, we bring heifers from the Montana ranch. We may or may not bring them to Texas to use for replacements. We might stop them at our ranch in Kansas to breed there to sell, or to bring, and frankly, I'll be honest, Dr. Ellis and I talked about this last October, and I have a set of heifers that we brought from our Montana ranch to our Kansas ranch because we needed animals there to stock. We have, they bred 95%, by the way, just so you know. And a portion of those are sitting waiting on trucks to come to the Texas ranch. So this has a very important impact to our organization. And I'll be up front. It really concerns me that the proposed regulations will devalue, particularly my heifer calves on that Montana ranch. Because it's even going to be somewhat more of a burden even to our Texas ranch if we bring those heifers here. And I appreciate some of the comments, because it helps me a little bit better to understand, because I could see bringing those heifers, putting them in one pasture, even if they run out of grass, I can't move them, till 20 months is up, so I can test them.
We'll let you move them.
So I want to point that out, but what I want you to do is understand that these guys, Dr. Zalewski and these guys have really done a good job, and they've really got after it. We've been testing cattle on our ranch. In fact, This is a give or take number, so don't write it down, but we test approximately 2,600 cattle on our ranch every year. All of our replacement heifers are tested at pregnant time, so the pregnant replacement heifers and the open replacement heifers are tested. Every animal that leaves the ranch is tested. Then we'll test approximately another 1,200 animals across the ranch. So we have an extensive testing program. We do have exposure to numerous elk. Most of those elk, though, aren't in, this is one of those maybe I shouldn't even say because it'll make a liar out of you, but the majority of those times, those elk are not calving in the same location as the cows. So it seems to me, and it concerns me, that if we've done all this testing in our herd, and we have a set of cows that in a 45-day breeding period, 70% of 7,000 cows will calve in the first 21 days, that to have to bring heifers from my Montana ranch to my Texas ranch, or even cows sometimes if we bring cows, and then have to quarantine, for lack of a better word, those cattle, it just concerns me some, particularly where we've never had a reaction. Now, I would tell you that, and this is just thinking out loud as I've listened, and I think this is good discussion, is that, you know, if you were bringing cattle from a herd that had some positive test at some time, it would make sense to me. But I just want us to be very cautious with the decision we're making. The other thing is that as a Texas producer, that I want us to be careful that we don't set a precedent in some decision we made here that we might all have to live with at some time. Because I think we're all after the same goal. So I had a couple of pages of notes. I'm not going to go that. You've discussed this in depth, and we don't need to further that. But I just wanted you to know from an operational standpoint that it does concern me, some of the thoughts that we've got here, particularly having ranches in 2-3 locations. Yes, sir.
When you get these cattle into Texas, do you have an opportunity to run them through chute, or are you going to recheck them, vaccinate them, inoculate them for the problems that we have here in Texas after they arrive? You know, say within 90 days or something?
Typically, we wouldn't, because one of the things that we try to do, and fortunately, one of the things, my responsibilities is compliance and best management practices, but we have a similar vaccination program at all of our ranches. So we try to be very consistent, so we don't necessarily have to do that. Obviously, if you bring heifers here, you'll bring them back at preg check time, those kind of things.
Yeah, my point being is that we could have an inspector there, pull a blood sample, and no inconvenience for you, you know.
I think that's the key, is really making sure we make this inconvenient. Is if I've heard some discussion today, even if I think that it's unwarranted and maybe overkill, there's probably some ways we could work through it, just based on.
And we're committed to that, absolutely committed to that.
So, but I'll be very upfront. I do think you will devalue my opportunity with those heifers coming out of that area.
Are you marketing those heifers?
We do at times, yes. And it's, if I didn't already own them, I wouldn't go buy them. That's just the way it is.
Okay,
Thank you all.
thank you. Do we have any further discussion? Yes.
Make sure I understand what y'all want to do. 'Cause
No, I think I can answer that. We're basically going to vote on the proposed, we're vote to adopt it as written, but with, in the meantime, between now and the next meeting, Dr. Ellis consult with our EPI team to maybe consider some future changes rather quickly if we feel that herds within the DSA that have been tested can maybe be handled differently.
If we were to vote on this today, it passes, you got 30, and we have an amendment to change it, does that require another period of time for us to where those changes are implemented?
Well, that's what I was trying to understand, if you were wanting to change what was changed for adoption, you are gonna get into kind of substance, how far, you know, versus if you wanna change, you sound like you wanna go ahead and adopt this and then look to propose amendments to it at the next meeting?
That's what I'm saying, especially with the fact that Dr. Ellis has kind of made he would, before we do any changes, we'd sure want to consult with the EPI staff before any changes are made.
Does that then make this rule go into effect as of, say,
Yeah, the rule
January?
would still go into well, you know.
Without the amendments?
He doesn't have to.
It can go, it's 20 days after it's filed, so you can set it though through the motion if you wanted to make it effective at a later date.
That's what I'm saying, if the amendments won't go into effect at next meeting, they'll have to wait, so this rule potentially goes into effect at that time as we pass it.
And that's exactly right. The rule would go into effect before the next meeting, so then you would be amending a live rule.
You mean next
A rule-
June before you put your actual amendments
Or
to go into
adopt,
effect?
then that's exactly right.
Well, I would consult with Dr. Ellis to see his opinion on any delay on enforcement of this rule.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you guys. Our recommendation was the rule.
Okay.
We modified the rule to back off the rule. I'm committed to working with individual producers. We could enter into individual herd plans that are outside the rule, like a commuter herd type. We have all kinds of ways for the herds that have surveillance to work one-on-one with that.
You got your
guys-
waiver.
I can waive things. I can enter into, we could create a process for individual waivers based upon a herd-to-herd agreement. I don't know how many herds are like Matador. There's maybe, I don't know, but that's probably the exception rather than the norm. These, the heifers that are the wheat heifers that may be breeders later, there's nothing we can do about that other than we're putting everyone on notice that we are concerned about it. And you ask my opinion, I would say our staff will evaluate potential ways to lessen the burden on the producers that are doing a lot of surveillance in their herds, give credit to Montana or any other state with really good management practices, come back with proposed amendments at the next meeting, but in the meantime, pass the rule. I mean, that's my recommendation, but it's y'all's call.
I say we go that direction.
Okay. Then, do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 35 brucellosis located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we pass item 14A, motions, Chapter 35 brucellosis. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have a tremendous degree of faith in our executive director and his staff, but I'm in a moral quandary right now because I have a very strong philosophical problem pushing this through as it is. At this time, I'd like to abstain from this vote.
My biggest issue right now is that I'm not sure discussion-wise, everybody likes what we have. I'm just not real comfortable in passing something or putting something forward and saying, okay, we're gonna go back and change it. And then the changes won't occur until possibly next June, and they've got their whole heifer replacements. The negativity of this, that there's a better solution, that waiting 3-4 months, I don't know. I'm real concerned about us passing things that we really may not like as far as discussion is, and then coming back and saying we're just gonna change it later on. I mean, sometimes time's on your side. It can be very negative. I'm just very concerned us setting that kind of precedence at this point in time.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with Ken and Dick Winters on this. We're going to make a rule. We're going to amend later while we pass it.
Well, we have Dr. Ellis, who can issue waivers under certain circumstances for people like Matador, that we feel comfortable with the cattle and the way their testing program. He'll be identifying when they were last tested, things like that. I say we go ahead and go with the rule.
We have gone through the same process with this proposed regulation that we have on a lot of different regulations. We've asked for, Dr. Ellis originally asked for a comment from his epidemiologist and their staff on the risk involved. We, as a group, unanimously, if I'm not mistaken, adopted the proposed rule. We have gotten some new insight from the state of Montana, and we appreciate them traveling down here. But at the same time, in my opinion, as chairman, and it's just my opinion, that it still does not, I'm assuming that our EPI staff had all this information also. I mean, we don't. Our EPI staff does, and Dr. Ellis does, and that's why they proposed this. This agency actually can work, if we deem necessary, relatively quickly. There can be waivers in the interim, but if there are some changes, we can work towards that. But in my honest opinion, I think that our staff had all this information when they made their decision. That may be a naive assumption in my part, but I don't think I'm wrong. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm concerned about from a veterinarian perspective, about the foci and the wildlife there and the ability for that stuff to move. We know they've got wolves, we know they have coyotes. They may not have buzzards, but they've got crows, birds that can transfer it around. You know, from that perspective, I have a bad feeling about not going ahead and going on with the regulation.
Is there any
And
further?
allowing our executive director to use his better judgment to allow waivers under certain circumstances to bypass the regulation.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? If none, all in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Motion carries. Dean, item B.
Yeah. All right, now, bring to the next one. This is for chapter 40, this is regarding CWD. This is what Dr. Schwartz alluded to in his epidemiological discussion. This literally was making changes to our CWD rule in order to bring it in line with the federal program so that they would approve and recognize our CWD program is meeting the federal standard and therefore that they would bless it. So the rule changes that were identified proposed, there were no comments and stuff for that purpose. And like I say, everything went through with no comments. Do you have any questions?
Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt amendments to Chapter 39, scabies located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve.
Yeah.
That was. You're absolutely right, scabies was in there, I apologize.
He was discussing 40.
CWD was C.
Which would be chapter 40.
Yeah, it was chapter 40, 14C.
That's behind the next one.
Yes, I apologize once again, there was so little of scabies, I just thumbed right past it.
I'll move to adopt amendments of Chapter 40 then.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Okay, chronic waste disease located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
And I shall second.
Been moved and seconded that we adopt item 14C, Chapter 40. Is there any discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
All right, I'll drop you back to 14B. This is for chapter 39. Like I said, I apologize. There's not often we have a scabies amendment, let me say that. I mean, so, and what this is it's, once again, the treatment standards is when these rules were in place. And today, this is the first time I've had a chance to modify the chapter in 15 years. But it's to bring it in line with new treatment options afforded to scabies. So that's really what these changes we're doing. Yes, sir, Dr. Ellis?
We're going to actually have to come back and amend the whole chapter next time because this is only one piece of the chapter, and every one of them, ivermectin can be a treatment. So we will come back and probably amend the rest of this chapter next time.
Well, as we go through,
gonna
as
be
we
a lot
talked
more
about
hard.
too, we plan to go through and clean up all our
Yeah, it's
chapters.
gonna
This
be-
was one that was just immediately identified for this
Right.
section.
You're exactly
because it
right.
was pragmatic, that they were seeing this.
You're right.
So we'll bring you more cleanups in the future, but this one is to to bring this one in line quickly because they've seen this actually come about
Okay.
and want to use this treatment standard.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move again, since I moved this once already, that we adopt the amendment to Chapter 39 SCAVY located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
And I shall second again.
Been moved and seconded, we approve item 14B, Chapter 39. Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. I'm going to have to break out my parliamentary book next.
Lot of shaking and baking and moving around.
Mover and a shaker.
All right, 2 to go. So, this next one I bring you is 14D. This is for Chapter 43, tuberculosis. It's specifically for our subchapter C, which is our TB chapter for cervix for deer. And literally, this too is recognizing a new form of TB, I say treatment, testing that can be used through the Stat Pack. This is one that the federal government has recently recognized, and so we're incorporating into the program to recognize its official status and can be used by the practitioner.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the amendments to Chapter 43, tuberculosis, located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 14D, Chapter 43, tuberculosis. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Last one, can you believe it? We've gotten there. Okay, this is Chapter 50. This is for 14E. This is our animal disease traceability chapter. This was the initial proposal for which we got no comments, but literally it was including some definitions that are the same as the federal one, as well as to recognize the approved tagging sites as noted in the federal rules. So this brings, so we now have official tagging sites that we can authorize that will work under the federal requirements for interstate vehicle purposes. I said there was no comments. If you have any questions, let me know.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adopt the new Chapter 50 located in Title 4 of the Texas Administrative Code as discussed today.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve item 14E, Chapter 50, animal disease traceability. Is there any further discussion? None, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And Chairman, now that this passed, this will give us the opportunity to go visit with all the markets and talk to them about the rule. I mean,
And
that's what we were waiting on.
And you're going to do that with Dr. Varner and his staff?
Our employees are going to go together to make sure they understand it and whatever. Personal visits.
Okay. I would like to just briefly go back to 14A and to try to again, explain to our friends from Montana that we in no way whatsoever want to impede trade. In effect, I mean, the livestock industry has gone through a very tumultuous time through droughts, through prices, through corn prices, through a lot of things. And the last thing we need is for a federal or a state agency to impede trade. So we will continue. We can work fast here if we need to make some adjustments. But I firmly believe in our staff and their recommendations to us. We got a different perspective. And again, a lot of that I think was new to us as commissioners, but I don't think it was new information, again, to our staff. So with that, we're willing to work with you. I'm going to provide you with my personal cell phone number and business card and with my state card. And if I can be of any assistance through Dr. Ellis and our agency, please just give me a call and don't hesitate.
I'd like to have a statement also. I really appreciate y'all coming down to Texas, but I've been a veterinarian for 40 years, and back in '73 I tested 3 sale yards, and I brucellosis, bangs vaccinated, and S-branded up to 500 or 600 head of cows a week. We've come a long way here, and we're scared. We're scared. And I appreciate Dr. Ellis's position, but as long as there are a few of those elk out there, it scares me. But here again, Chairman Morales, Dr. Ellis, we're going to work with you guys. And we appreciate Matador Cattle Company coming here. And we're not going to slam the door on Montana cattle. We're going to work with you. So we appreciate you coming here.
Thank you, Dr. Vickers. Next meeting, Dr. Ellis, do we need to have a December meeting?
I don't think, there was some question initially based on some language in one of the laws. I don't think so. You can do it in January. You can do it whenever you want to answer your question.
Okay. Why don't we, since that's a tough time of the year, I'll talk to Dr. Ellis and Carol, and we'll discuss that, and we'll look at some dates, and we'll shoot some emails out to the commissioners, and whether after further thought, we may need to do something in December, we'll look at that. If not, we'll look at January dates. So let's don't try to set the meeting today. We will maybe take a few weeks, settle, and see where we're going to be this fall, and then set that meeting date for later. Okay? Then I do call this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.
There's gonna be